Welcome everyone to this meeting of the California Ocean Protection Council. My name is Wade Crowfoot and I serve as our California Natural Resources Secretary, and I also have the honor of chairing what we know as OPC. So we are going to get underway by calling the roll.
Chair Crowfoot.
Here.
Controller Cohen.
Present.
Katie Landau.
Here.
Catherine Moore.
Here.
And Assembly Member Addis.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. So,
Wait, I'm sorry, we forgot Megan.
oh,
Sorry.
we have Megan Rocha, who is a valued member of the Ocean Protection Council.
I can just scoot.
So let me ask, is Megan, are you here?
I am here.
Okay, our apologies. So we have a good, productive meeting as usual today, and we kick it off with several of us providing opening remarks. I wanted to first congratulate and thank Controller Cohen for a productive time on the council. As those who observe and follow the OPC know, there is a rotating seat between the Lieutenant Governor and our State Controller. And so we benefited from you and your team's leadership here. And as you prepare to cycle off the council, I'd turn it over to you for any thoughts.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you heard by introduction, my name is Malia Cohen. I served San Francisco as a San Francisco supervisor. But before being elected, Wade Crowfoot and I, a long time ago, were staffers.
True.
And I'm actually delighted to be here, I don't know, almost 20 years later, maybe, to serve California with you by your side. And that goes for every member that's on this body. I want to uplift and recognize my Deputy Controller, Christina Kunkel, who's a staffer, who's been my right hand when it comes to everything, when it comes to the environment. She keeps me briefed. She keeps me just in the position to know what's going on, and it helps. She's my finger on the pulse of the state of California. So I just wanted to publicly recognize her. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. So it's been a busy end of the year on many fronts, and I wanted to share a little bit about the work of our agency, and particularly Jenn Eckerle, who is the Executive Director of OPC, as well as Mike Eckerle. Recently, we were part of a delegation that traveled to Colombia for the United Nations Summit on Biodiversity. Many don't know that most every nation in the world is party to a treaty to protect nature across the planet. And in 2022, there's quite a big breakthrough in the updating of the treaty to make commitments across nations to do a lot more to protect nature. And that's, of course, nature on land and nature in the water. One of those pieces of the commitment that the nations agreed to was to achieve 30 by 30, to protect 30% of the planet, both land and oceans, by 2030. And we're really excited with California's leadership on that, toward that end. And so one of the reasons we were in Colombia as part of that United Nations discussion was to talk about what California is doing, but not only on 30 by 30, on other groundbreaking leadership efforts that we've been part of, including the establishment and operation of our marine protected area networks. Of course, you all know that's 124 underwater parks that help protect our environment off the coast. So it was a really productive time there. And my key takeaway is that this UN organized movement of nations is necessary, but not adequate. We need a lot more leadership, a lot more action of what are called subnational governments, like states, like California, provinces, even cities, as well as tribal governments and all manner of non-governmental partners. So it was a good, it was a really productive time for us to actually lift up what's working in California, to learn from others, and to be part of the push for stronger action. A couple weeks later, I had a chance to travel with Cal EPA Secretary Yana Garcia, as well as our colleague from the governor's office, Sam Asefa, to the United Nations Summit on Climate Change, which is a separate treaty, but many overlapping issues. And likewise, we talk about the importance of nature-based solutions and actually investing in the protection of nature, including our marine ecosystems, to protect not only nature, but our environment and our home. So it was really productive. I appreciate Jenn, Director Eckerle, your partnership in all of this, and look forward to continuing to lift up California's leadership in this respect. I'll note also that in the recent election, Proposition 4 passed, which was known as the climate bond. That's a $10 billion general obligation bond that the voters approved that will enable the state to invest that amount of money in the protection of our natural resources and combating climate change and protecting people from its impacts. A significant portion of that funding went to protect our coast as well as our ocean environment. And so we're looking forward to, and actually in real time, are working with our Department of Finance and the governor's office to propose a set of appropriations in the governor's January proposed budget to begin appropriating those bond proceeds in the coming year. I think that's a real silver lining on an otherwise challenging budget situation. Today, we will consider approval of funds for the third round of the Senate Bill 1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Grant Program, and we're excited about that. We'll also have two informational updates. First, on the inaugural Environmental Justice Advisory Board for California's coast and ocean, and then the second on the development of a decision-making framework to advance 30 by 30 in coastal waters. As always, public comment is important to these meetings, and we'll take public comment after items 4 through 7 on the agenda. We also provide an opportunity after item 8 for members of the public to comment on any issues, regardless of whether or not they're on the agenda. After or during each of these items, I'll invite public comment. If you wish to make a comment and are attending in person, you can simply line up at the podium. We'll take in-person public comments first. After all in-person attendees have spoken, we will take public comment from those joining us virtually. It's important to note that a lot of the participants of our Ocean Protection Council meetings are able to join virtually. And if you're joining us through Zoom, please raise your virtual hand during the item in which you wish to speak, and we will unmute you, announce your name, and you'll be able to provide comment to the council. If you've called into the meeting via telephone, you'll need to press pound 2 and then raise your hand. Depending on how you've accessed the meeting, you may also need to unmute yourself. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes each, so we can hear from everybody and work our way through the meeting. And unless otherwise, there'll be a timer on the screen to track your allotted time. And then ask you, if you're interested in providing public comment, do raise your hand or indicate your desire to speak by the end of the item presentation. Once we end an item, we will not plan to return to it. So with that being said, I want to just invite any of our other council members to share any opening thoughts or announcements they may have.
I can go again.
Yeah, let's do it.
I didn't realize that. Well, I'm glad to know I have 2 bites of the apple. So first of all, I just want to recognize Director Eckerle. Where is she? There she is. I just want to say you've welcomed me from day one. I really appreciate the time that you spent with me. I want to make sure that we celebrate all of the work OPC does in support of our unparalleled California coastline. And a lot of that has to do with your work. No offense to you, Mr. Chair. I grew up in San Francisco, so I grew up as a kid growing up on the Pacific coast. Just in San Francisco, you know, if you follow the politics, you know, there was a whole fight about Prop K on whether to close the Great Highway. I voted, but I won't disclose how I voted. But that's where I learned how to roller skate. That's where I go to as a place of just refuge, to just clear my mind from this political and public life. It's a place that I enjoy bringing my daughter to. So to be able to sit on a body like this and some of the other environmental boards that I sit on, it's actually a personal commitment to the work that you're doing every single day. So I just wanted to get that on the record. And for those of you that are unaware, my council seat is always held by the chair of the State Lands Commission, and which is a position that rotates annually between the state controller and the lieutenant governor, like the chair said. I currently serve as the State Lands and chair, and it's truly been an honor to serve this year. In January, I plan to hand the reins back to the Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, and I will be joining you again in 2026. So seeing this as my last meeting of the year, I have a few just comments that I want to provide on the upcoming strategic plan mentioned in the Executive Director's report. I'll be brief. So most importantly, I think we must authentically elevate the voices of underserved communities. I come from one, and I've always represented one in all of my public life. So when I step into a space, I want people that I represent to know that they are being fully represented. And I want to encourage the results of community and tribal listening sessions to continue to go forward. I think that is incredibly important and a step in the right direction. And I believe that these listening sessions should guide the development of the strategic plan. These voices and perspective of community are disproportionately impacted by coastline climate impacts. I believe that they should direct our strategic priorities moving forward. And of course, I continue to advocate for fair compensation, especially for tribal communities overburdened with consultation and who have stewarded the land we are currently occupying and the coastline since the beginning. This also includes compensations for participation in the planning process, plus pursuing land back agreements, engaging in co-management strategies, providing more funding opportunities, and any other ideas that emerge in roundtable sessions. OPC has truly paved the way for equitable partnerships like that statewide, a shining example, quite frankly. So I want to make sure that we give voice to that and that we are celebrating that leadership while acknowledging that we still have a long way to go. I also want to join in the choir for the celebration of for the passage of Prop 4. Thank you, Director Eckerle and Chair Crowfoot, for including this in your report. This is $10 billion for climate resilience, and I want to also thank all the voters in the state of California that passed this initiative. Secretary Crowfoot and I understand that CNRA is currently hard at work planning for an unallocated funds report. And we have countless crucial water, fire, and climate projects to consider. I understand that. But I know that you are already prioritizing communities disproportionately impacted by climate change per the 40% carve out in the proposition language. I also want to take a moment and utilize this opportunity to encourage everyone to just maximize the investment to historically excluded communities, especially tribal communities who know their own land better than any of us could ever. Also, this is a prime opportunity to further invest in the Tijuana River crisis. A few months ago, I held the State Lands Commission meeting in the city of Imperial Beach and in their city council chambers. And Mayor Aguirre graciously led me on a tour of multiple contaminated sites along the Tijuana River preceding the meeting, and it was horrible. It was just horrifying, it was disgusting, and sad. We have an opportunity. Well, let me back up. In the meeting, we heard directly from Imperial Beach community members who joined the meeting, who passionately were advocating their firsthand experiences and living and working near openly flowing sewage. I mean, if you can just imagine that, raising your families, your seniors, it's a crime. But this bond allocates $50 million for the Tijuana River, which is a great start. In addition to potential funding from SB 10, which was introduced by Senator Padilla earlier this month. But this is nowhere near enough. The longer we wait, the higher the bill rises. We need to fully capitalize on this opportunity to allocate additional Prop 4 funding for Tijuana River. These are personal priorities of mine, So I'm delighted to hear you also voicing similar priorities, Chair Crowfoot. I am making this request of you today, just if you find a few extra coins, throw them towards the Tijuana River. Everything, a little bit goes a long way, but we do have a lot of work ahead of us. I know we are all collectively in the space, we are sharing these priorities, and I thank you all for your past, and I'm going to thank you for your future work on this initiative. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a few comments. I will pass it back to you, Chair.
Thanks so much. Really helpful to understand your priorities, and couldn't agree with you more on utilizing the bond to ensure that we continue the work of lifting up underserved communities. I'm really gratified that the bond actually requires a significant portion of that $10 billion, towards 40–50%, to get to those communities.
Yes.
And we can use the bond to improve the way that we do business in the state government, including helping those impacted communities access state funding more easily and quickly. Also want to echo your priority for the Tijuana River. Simply put, it's an untenable situation. And as we know, the city of Imperial Beach, those residents, it's a beach community, couldn't actually, were advised not to touch the water for almost 3 years, over 3 years. And that's just, in this day and age, in a place as wealthy as California, United States, that just shouldn't be allowed to happen. So know that we're specifically focused on accelerating the solutions, both pressing the federal government to play its role as fundamentally responsible, but then doing what we can in the state. And I think Director Eckerle, who sits in our position at the Coastal Commission, that's working overtime to hold everyone accountable on this, and know that I take your admonition to heart to work to identify additional funding where we can contribute to the solution. So thank you for that.
Of course, thank you.
Let me turn it over to Director Eckerle for her Executive Director report.
Thank you, Chair Crowfoot. I also want to extend my thanks to Controller Cohen and Deputy State Controller Kunkel for their leadership and support of our work. We will miss you here, but we look forward to continued collaboration, and we will see you back here in 2026. I wanted to provide just a little more detail on the climate bond as it relates to the Ocean Protection Council. The bond includes a total of $210 million for OPC, $135 million for projects that build coastal and ocean ecosystem resilience, and $75 million to support sea level rise adaptation through our SB1 grant program. In the coming weeks, I will be coordinating closely with leadership from the Coastal Conservancy, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, state parks, and other agencies to maximize coordination and leverage the climate bond investments to improve coastal and ocean ecosystem health, climate resilience, and public access to the coast. As you heard from both Controller Cohen and Secretary Crowfoot, the bond requires up to 40% of the funds to provide meaningful and direct benefits to vulnerable and underserved communities, and it challenges us to do better to ensure that our investments are resulting in real outcomes for all Californians. We're looking forward to doing that. Shifting gears, during item 4 today, Maria Rodriguez will provide an update on OPC's Environmental Justice Advisory Board and their work over the last 6 or so months. 2 of our board members, Frank Buncombe and Mario Ordonez, will also be joining us virtually to share their experiences and insights, and I am so excited for you all to meet them. Frank and Mario, we really appreciate you making the time to be with us today. On offshore wind, we know that environmental monitoring and research will be critical to understand and minimize impacts to wildlife and ecosystems. To address that need, Ocean Protection Council, in collaboration with state agency partners, has been leading initial scoping and discussions for the creation of a potential West Coast Science Collaborative for offshore wind. The purpose of this collaborative would be to provide independent and objective scientific expertise that can inform coordinated environmental research, monitoring, and analysis, and support regulatory decision-making and ongoing adaptive management, similar to the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative that was created on the East Coast. Over the last several months, Dr. Justine Kimball of our staff and myself have been having early targeted discussions with federal, tribal partners, and NGO partners on the initial scope for this collaborative, which was developed in coordination with the Coastal Commission, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Lands Commission, and the Energy Commission. We have presented the initial concept at the Energy Commission's Ocean Energy Tribal Working Group. We have sent letters requesting early consultation to all tribes, and we will host 2 virtual early consultation sessions for tribes to learn more and provide additional feedback next week. We plan to launch a robust public process, including in-person meetings and tribal roundtables in early 2025, to gather broader feedback and finalize the scope for this collaborative. As you will recall, OPC received $3 million in the budget last year to initiate and launch this effort. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has offered an additional $700,000 to support this scoping effort, which could include facilitation, workshop planning, outreach materials, and compensation for tribal participation, among other activities. Shifting gears to marine carbon dioxide removal. With climate change impacts increasing in frequency and severity, carbon dioxide removal and sequestration will play a key role in avoiding catastrophic impacts, in addition to greenhouse gas emission reductions. The concept of marine carbon dioxide removal, or MCDR, has been gaining increased attention in recent months and includes technologies that range from increasing phytoplankton growth to uptake carbon dioxide, sequestering carbon by sinking cultivated seaweed into the deep ocean, and altering seaweed chemistry to increase pH and enable the ocean to absorb additional carbon dioxide. While the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy released a national marine carbon dioxide removal research strategy this November, the carbon sequestration benefits of marine CDR strategies are challenging to quantify or have otherwise not been scientifically determined. Additionally, no scientific framework currently exists to evaluate the wide-ranging environmental risks of marine CDR technologies specific to California. OPC is coordinating closely with relevant state agencies and with external partners, including the Ocean Science Trust, to track this nascent but emerging industry to understand the efficacy of marine CDR approaches and potential impacts and benefits to California. We anticipate bringing an informational item on this topic to the Council at our March meeting next year. A bit on our ocean and coastal report. OPC has continued our partnership with Ocean Science Trust to develop the first indicator-based California Coast and Ocean report card, scheduled to be completed at the end of 2025. This report card is an important tool to inform the state of the current health and trends of California's ocean and to inform priority investments to fill gaps for monitoring and detect ocean change. Preliminary indicators regarding the health of California's coast and ocean will be presented during the March Council meeting alongside our annual Coast and Ocean report. Turning to personnel, I am thrilled to share that we recently hired Megan Williams into a permanent position as a Coastal Resilience Program Manager. Megan's in the audience right there. Megan started with us as a Sea Grant Fellow and over the last 2 years has been serving in a limited term position with OPC, helping lead our SB1 grant program. So you'll hear more about that in just a minute. In her new role, she will continue to support our sea level rise adaptation work while also helping lead efforts on offshore wind. We are so happy, Megan, to have you become a permanent member of our team. We are also in the process of hiring our other 2 offshore wind positions, our water quality manager position, and we will be posting an announcement for an associate governmental program analyst to support our administration and finance priorities. And I will just do a shout out to the booth. Sarah has been holding down all the things as it relates to our admin and finance work. So Sarah, thank you so much for doing everything you're doing. We will be joined in January by 2 new Sea Grant Fellows. Haley Brown will serve as our Biodiversity Sea Grant Fellow. She is an interdisciplinary scientist and communications professional dedicated to advancing collaborative and tribally led stewardship in California. She's coming to us from UC Santa Cruz, where her graduate work focused on assessing barriers and opportunities for tribally led native shellfish aquaculture. She also has experience working at the intersection of conservation and human well-being more broadly, and some experience with environmental education. While at OPC, Haley will support advancement of our goal to conserve 30% of California's coastal waters by 2030 and implementation of our tribal engagement strategy. We will also be joined by Olivia Wan, who will serve as our Climate Change Sea Grant Fellow. Olivia will come to us from the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, where she has been working as part of the Social Scientist Advisory Team. Previously, Olivia was a Margaret Davidson Graduate Fellow, Research Fellow with the NOAA Office of Coastal Management. There, she studied social equity outcomes of nature-based coastal management and adaptation strategies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And in 2023, she graduated with her master's from Coastal Science and Policy program at UC Santa Cruz. Olivia is eager to apply her multidisciplinary expertise to OPC's climate program, and in particular, to help us with our SB1 Sea Level Rise Grant Program. We really look forward to Haley and Olivia joining our team. And finally, closing out, an update on our efforts to develop a new strategic plan. You will recall at your September council meeting, we had a discussion that initiated the development of OPC's next 5-year strategic plan to guide our work through 2030. On November 20th, we hosted a virtual public listening session and a separate virtual tribal roundtable to solicit priorities to inform our updated strategic plan. In January and February, we will be hosting 6 in-person regional listening sessions and separate in-person tribal roundtables to further understand local priorities. I think we might have a slide that shows, perfect, thank you, James. So the locations and dates of our listening sessions are shown here. We also have created an online form, which is posted on our homepage, that provides another opportunity for partners to share priorities. We will use the input from all of these pathways to inform the first draft of our strategic plan, which will be brought to this council in June for initial feedback. Based on input from the council and partners on the draft, we will develop a final strategic plan for consideration and approval by the council at its December 2025 meeting. Chair Crowfoot, that concludes my report, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much. Council members, any questions for Executive Director Eckerle? All right, then let's turn to Liz Whiteman, Dr. Whiteman, Executive Director of Ocean Science Trust, for your update.
Thank you, Chair Crowfoot. Council members, a few updates building on Director Eckerle's comments with my science lens to our collaborative work together. Beginning with an update on our collective effort to develop a Coast and Ocean report card, beginning by extending thanks to all who provided public input during the recent public comment period. As we move forward with decisions about what indicators to include in this first iteration of the report card, that when taken together can paint a meaningful picture of the coupled human ecological system of our coastal ecosystems, we received useful feedback from across many different sectors and up and down the state. And it will be really, really important and helpful as we compile the first public draft of the report card that, as Jen mentioned, we'll be bringing to the first council meeting in March next year. Now, in addition, there's still lots of work to do on each of the indicators to gather data and work with our groups of experts to interpret and assess, where are we at? Where are we trending for each of them? So although the public comment period officially closes today, we intend to leave the survey open. California just has such a rich tapestry of ongoing data collection programs that we know we still have many more to uncover and learn about. To help us identify what's most important to measure and ongoing data collection programs that could offer opportunities to continue tracking progress into the future. So you can access the survey from the OPC website, or also you can feel free to reach out to my colleague Jill Harris, who is leading our collective report card effort. So switching topics, you'll hear a little bit more, a lot more, about progress on 30 by 30 in Agenda Item 6 from Abby. So I'll just note that we continue to engage with the Technical Advisory Panel and the broader community of scientific experts to support in providing a robust science grounding for the decision-making framework. And in addition, and I really wanted to highlight this, we're working with the OPC team to support lifting and meaningful inclusion of traditional knowledge as a really critically important element in expert advice and guidance on 30 by 30 implementation. So we look forward to conversations beginning soon, like ASAP, with traditional knowledge holders and other experts to co-create how to do this work together, and then collectively to do the work together as a priority in early 2025. Third of 4 updates today, and actually related to 30 by 30, you may recall that I've previously shared how we're diving into understanding the science and practice of restoration and mitigation in coastal habitats. We're immensely grateful for this engagement of a small group of academic experts over the past year plus that has really enabled us to synthesize an understanding of current restoration tools and practices across a range of habitats, with associated understanding and gaps in knowledge about how the efficacy of restoration efforts. This is a great foundation for encouraging coordinated action and accelerated coordinated action, but has also revealed just how much climate change is challenging. Of how we do restoration, where we do restoration, why we do restoration, and associated our expectations of success in any particular place. So knowing that there are cutting-edge advances that we can draw on and learn from in California, from other jurisdictions and habitats such as coral reefs, we're now working together to scope a series of science conversations for early 2025 that tackle these forward-looking pieces. And we look forward to the learning that can unlock even more coordinated and impactful restoration action in the coming years. So lastly, I also wanted to give mention to carbon dioxide removal. As Director Eckerle mentioned, we've seen rapidly increasing interest in this topic in California and nationally as a potential climate mitigation strategy. And I thought it would be useful to just provide some quick context from the academic science community on this. First, it is important, and I feel compelled to say as a scientist myself, that like all other carbon dioxide removal pathways, these efforts are being considered only as a complement to, and never as a substitution for deep greenhouse gas emissions reductions. But as Jenn noted, there are important science questions and many remaining unknowns about the efficacy and safety of marine carbon dioxide removal. So as we approach this challenge from Ocean Science Trust, our role is to do our part so that the needed science for responsible, thoughtful policy development is ready and accessible when it's needed to be called upon. But this landscape of technological advances and coupled with natural processes is not how academic scientists traditionally organize themselves and think about collaborations in the university setting. So it demands that there are opportunities and venues to break down typical disciplinary silos so that you get marine chemists, geochemists, biologists, oceanographers, ecologists, social scientists in the same room working together across these traditional siloed disciplines in our academic world. And it's, I think, important for us to play a role in building that capacity and community in the science world to be ready with trusted, objective knowledge for policy engagement at the right time. So to guide that science capacity building, it's obviously useful to understand, where it's known, what the science questions and research priorities are among state managers, policymakers, legislators. So to that end, we co-organized with SCWRP, Southern California Water Research Program, and other partners, a 2-day workshop across sectors to explore the state of the science and discuss priority research needs. And we look forward to sharing the outcomes of this workshop broadly very, very soon. We're also tracking how the federal government is thinking about building science capacity and what opportunities that might give for knowing those current unknowns in the future. And a committee of subject matter experts from across the federal government released the first national MCDR research strategy. It remains to be seen how that plays out in the priorities of the new administration, but for now does signal increasing federal interest in investing in the needed science. So we appreciate our partnership with OPC on this topic, through which we've been able to engage with state partners and support early level setting and deliberations with hopefully relevant scientific resources. And we look forward to continuing that work into next year. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much. Any questions from commission members, council members, I should say? I'll just say on the report card, I know I'm really eager for the completion of the first version. I think it was 2019, believe it or not, that Secretary Blumenfeld and I really raised this as a need. I think those of us, certainly I'm not sure if I include myself in this group, but there are those who live in the complexity of the ocean and coast and the challenges that face us. And many folks in the room and on OPC understand these issues really well. But I'll submit that most Californians don't. And so the whole notion of this report card was to try to create some way that we could help Californians understand the challenges and the opportunities on our coast and oceans. And so I think unless and until we have a more distilled way that people can track what we're facing, we're not yet doing our full job in terms of building this movement to continue to protect and restore our coast. And so I understand there's a tension between simplicity and complexity, and I think part of the challenge and probably why you're asking for so much input is it seems like there are myriad measurements and criteria and ways that you could assess health, and I get that. But I want to say, let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. We're coming at the tail end, the first quarter of the administration, and I really do want to leave as one legacy of people like me a really clear summation that can be provided on a regular basis of the challenges that the coast is facing. So I'm really going to hold you to that end of 2025 timeline because I think it's critically important that we have something that people can understand, as easily as I hope they'll be able to this report card.
On it.
Yeah. All right, then let's move on to the next item, which is an action item. It's agenda item number 4. This is the consideration and approval of the disbursement of funds for Senate Bill 1, which is the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Grant Program. And we have Megan Williams, who is our newly minted Coastal Adaptation Program Manager. Congratulations. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Megan Williams, and I am the now Coastal Resilience Program Manager, was Coastal Adaptation. Sorry, the slide's out of date. Here to talk to you about the third set of SB1 projects that are recommended for funding approval, and also give you an update on a new funding opportunity that we are in the process of developing. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of background on the SB1 grant program, in August of 2023, OPC approved the disbursement of up to $95.9 million for the SB1 grant program to fund sea level rise adaptation planning or implementation projects. The overall goal of the SB1 grant program is to provide funding for coastal communities to develop consistent sea level rise adaptation plans and projects to build resilience to sea level rise along the entire coast of California and San Francisco Bay. To achieve this goal, the SB1 grant program offers 2 tracks of funding, one for pre-planning and planning phases, which is our track 1, and one for the project and implementation phase, which is our track 2. Track 1 officially opened for proposal submission in December of 2023, so a full year, and accepts proposals on a non-competitive rolling quarterly basis, provided the proposals satisfy the program requirements. Track 2, which is our project implementation phase, proposals will be accepted through a competitive process starting in mid-2025, subject to the availability of funding, which thanks to our Prop 4 funding is likely to happen. In June and September of this year, OPC approved the first and second rounds of SB1 projects, which totaled just over $11 million. Next slide, please. Following our September council meeting, we had a new application deadline of October 4th for proposals to be considered for funding at this council meeting. In total, we received 7 Track 1 proposals totaling $7.1 million in requested funding. All proposals first undergo an administrative evaluation to determine their completeness and eligibility, and then the proposals are reviewed by OPC staff in collaboration with either California Coastal Commission staff or San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission staff, depending on the project area location. Proposals are reviewed for their adherence to the sea level rise adaptation criteria and the evaluation criteria set forth within the solicitation. The agency collaboration with either Coastal Commission or BCDC ensures SB1 projects will contribute to the requirements that are set forth in Senate Bill 272, as well as adherence to either the Coastal Act or the McAteer-Petrus Act. This round of review resulted in 2 proposals that were invited to resubmit following incorporation of feedback from the review team, and 1 project that was deferred to the March 2025 council meeting. Next slide, please. Ultimately, our review resulted in selecting 4 Track 1 projects for funding approval today. 3 projects are located along the outer coast, and 1 is within the San Francisco Bay Area. On the outer coast, the Humboldt County Resource Conservation District proposes a community visioning and vulnerability assessment for the Eel River estuary. The Yurok tribe seeks funding to develop a sea level rise vulnerability assessment that will guide adaptation strategies for critical resources within the Yurok Reservation and along the Klamath River. In Southern California, the Los Angeles County Department of Beaches and Harbors aims to advance adaptation planning for LA County's beaches. The project brings together a multi-jurisdictional coalition to create coordinated strategies across 45 miles of coastline, from Nicholas Canyon Beach to Torrance Beach. Within the Bay Area, the City and County of San Francisco proposes to develop an equitable and actionable shoreline adaptation plan to address sea level rise vulnerabilities along the San Francisco Bay shoreline. This project will update prior assessments using the latest science, incorporate new data such as groundwater inundation risks, and engage communities to meet the requirements of Senate Bill 272. These 4 projects span all phases of the planning process, spanning from community visioning and vulnerability assessments through to the completion of sea level rise adaptation plans. The total funding requested under Track 1 is $3,521,568. Additionally, the LA County project leverages $100,000 in non-state funds, and the San Francisco project leverages $250,000 in non-state funds. Next slide, please. So now that I've covered the projects for which we're requesting funding approval, I would just like to take this opportunity to update the council and the public on a new funding opportunity that OPC staff are in the process of developing, and that is to support California Native American tribes in addressing sea level rise impacts on tribal cultural resources. OPC staff recognize the critical need for tribally led planning to protect sacred lands, burial grounds, and other culturally significant sites at risk of sea level rise. This funding opportunity will empower tribes to lead and inform culturally appropriate adaptation planning efforts, ensuring their concerns and priorities are integrated into broader sea level rise planning processes. Importantly, it will help tribes safeguard sensitive cultural information while engaging with local and regional jurisdictions. We anticipate releasing this solicitation in early 2025 and look forward to supporting tribes as they assess and address these critical risks to cultural heritage sites. Next slide, please. So with that, the recommendation is for just over $3.5 million to the Humboldt County Resource Conservation District, Los Angeles County Department of Beaches and Harbors, City and County of San Francisco, and Yurok Tribe to complete sea level rise adaptation planning projects. This action would meet Objective 1.1 from our strategic plan. And with that, next slide. Thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Megan. In just a moment, we will ask for and receive public comment on this item. I want to note that I believe Councilmember Roca may need to recuse herself on one of these items. And so after public comment, if that's something that you want to do, Councilmember, let us know and we can split up the discussion and the vote. I'll say, before we go to public comment, I'm really excited to see this funding. This is a big deal. We know that communities on the coast are literally on the front lines of sea level rise. And for so long, we at the state have wanted communities to be more proactive on planning, but they've lacked resources. So credit to the legislature, former Pro Tem Tony Atkins, Senator John Laird, and others for really driving this funding proposal forward, and it's exciting to see it start to come to fruition. With that, let's move to public comment. And just a reminder, if you're in the auditorium here at the Natural Resources Agency headquarters and want to make any public comment, please simply approach the podium. If you are joining by Zoom, you can raise your virtual hand through the Zoom feature, and you will be unmuted and called on. And if you are joining by telephone, which is another way you can join the meeting, you can press #2 in order to raise your hand. I'm not seeing any public comment here in the room, so I'll turn it to our colleague to see if we have any online public comment.
There are no online public commenters.
Okay. So then I would invite discussion of the council on these items. Our legal counsel, my colleague Heather, I think has advised us if indeed, Councilmember Roca, you do want to recuse yourself from one of those items, please let us know now, and then we can segment or separate the discussion.
Yes, please. I'd like to recuse myself from the Yurok Tribe's proposal.
Okay, great. So Councilmember Roca is going to be recusing herself from discussion of the grant to the Yurok tribal government. And so what I'll suggest is that we invite discussion and then potential actions on the other 3 grants, items 4.1 through 4.3. And then we'll take up the grant to Yurok tribal government separately. Are there any questions or points of discussion on the 3 grants, 4.1 through 4.3? And if not, could I invite a motion to...
I have a few questions,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood the geographic scope of the projects because you mentioned the outer coast, but it appears that 2 other projects are in the estuary. So if you could just clarify that for me, please.
Yeah, that is a good clarification, and I think I just did an oversimplification of saying outer coast versus the San Francisco Bay Area. So there is certainly the Yurok tribe and the Eel River estuary goes a little bit into the estuary, but we really had them focus for these projects on areas that it's going to actually be sea level rise impacting and not just river flooding or estuarine. So it goes a little bit beyond to the actual outer coast and coastline and then inland, but again, really focusing to make sure that it is sea level rise vulnerability that the project is assessing.
Okay, thank you for that. And for the Eel River project, it does mention that there's 2 tribes that they plan to engage with. And I know one of those tribes, the reservation, is actually within probably the footprint of the project. And so I was just wondering if there's been letters of commitment that have been provided from those 2 tribes, and to the previous comment made by the controller, if compensation's been provided for their involvement.
That is a good question as well. I don't believe that there was letter submitted within the proposal package from those tribes, but it is something that we certainly confirmed with them in terms of their intention and their engagement with those tribes, and it certainly is outlined in their proposed work plan, as well as something that we have noted that we are really looking for in the final one. In terms of actual compensation, that's another thing that I think as we continue these discussions with them to make sure and have that fleshed out in the final work plan is something that we will also make sure is reflected in their budget as well. I do believe it definitely has some community engagement money and funds to that project and for that, but in terms of actual compensation, it's something that we'll certainly make sure as we're doing the execution.
So how do you go about doing that if additional funds are needed?
Well, we could do up to 10% following your approval. And a lot of times there's also, just as we're finalizing the work plan, an ability to kind of shift some of the funds as we determine, exactly what's required in terms of reporting and things like that. And so we have sometimes been able to just do a little bit of a shift from their proposed budget and the funds that they've allocated for like project management into some of these other tasks and pieces of the work plan as it gets finalized.
Okay. I'm really pleased to see sort of a more diverse pool in terms of geography, because it seemed like the last projects have really been
Very
sort of
vague.
centered in a specific geography. So that's really great to see. And I just want folks to be really thoughtful as you're going through proposals in terms of multiple jurisdictions within an area. And make sure that all the parties within that jurisdiction are equitably included. And so for that reason is why I'm recusing myself from the Yurok Tribe's proposal. But just moving forward, I think that's very important, particularly if these projects are going to be rolled into local coastal plans or other planning efforts. All parties need to be at the table who have jurisdiction within that area. So thank you.
I totally agree about that, and I just want to say, especially, I think when I was here in September, we talked about expanding the proposal opportunity, especially in the Bay Area, for multi-jurisdictional plans to be available, and it's something that we've really been thinking about and trying to refine the proposals and asking those questions so that we have that information and that buy-in from all of the jurisdictions that are involved in the plan. So it is something that we're really thinking about moving forward and trying to continue to refine the process so that we have that information up front and that they are, from the beginning, scoping it in that way to provide a proposal to us that really has those answers and the right people at the table.
Yeah, and then just building off those comments briefly, you know, we're working in state government to hold ourselves accountable for early, often, and meaningful government-to-government consultation, which is very much a work in progress, but something we're committed to. And so you may already have this, and I think you address this, but I would just want to make sure that in these proposals that are coming to us, particularly where there is, you know, current tribal lands impacted, but really broadly because original homelands or homelands, you know, are definitionally throughout California, that there be really a clear criteria that there has been, you know, adequate and timely outreach to tribes that call those lands part of the homelands, such that there's just an expectation that if you're coming to OPC for that funding on the coast, you're doing that outreach.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, good. Could I invite a motion to adopt the proposed findings for projects 4.1 through 4.3? That's those 3 grants as recommended by staff to approve all these projects.
I'm happy to make a motion. I move for the authorization to disperse up to $3,521,568 to various grantees who submitted successful applications to the SB1 grant program for sea level rise adaptation planning or implementation projects as outlined in the staff recommendation.
That is a complete motion, and for that I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christina Kunkel.
The controller has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Katie Landau. And could we call the roll?
Chair Crowfoot,
Yes.
Controller Cohen,
Yes.
Katie Landau,
Yes.
Megan Rocha.
I'm abstaining.
Okay. So just to clarify, these are for the 3 grants with the exception of the.
Sorry, she said the 3.5 million, so I thought that was the total in the motion.
Oh, you know, I apologize. Can we bring back up the slide with the total? Because I actually take your point, which is the motion that.
I can take out them.
No, actually, I think you've done that correctly. We're doing the math here. So the controllers made a motion to approve the grants for 4.1 through 4.3, and that is the grant to Humboldt County Resource Conservation District, Los Angeles County Department of Beaches and Harbors, and City and County of San Francisco. So that is very much the motions on the table, and the total amount that of this is 3.177 million. So I've now just confirmed that motion. Katie, you're confirming your second of that motion, and then we will call the roll once more.
Chair Crowfoot,
Yes.
Katie Landau,
Yes.
Controller Cohen,
Aye.
and Megan Rocha.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Okay. So now we will take up action 4.4, which is the grant to the Yurok tribal government. And I'd entertain any discussion on this. Or if there's no discussion, a motion to approve Project 4.4, which is the grant in the total of $353,000 to the Yurok tribal government.
$343,958.
Okay.
I do have a question about that figure.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Is that a fair compensation? If so, how is it derived? I don't know the answer.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, is it fair to ask the question? Yes, this is something that we did talk about. It is a really small footprint, and so looking at like the actual mile square footage, basically, of what they are looking to assess, it was what they proposed to us. We have a 200,000 to 1.5 million range for Track 1 projects, and they were the ones that submitted the 343. So we trust that they, put forward what they felt was what they needed to be able to succeed for this one. And it also is just the pre-planning phase. So it's just community visioning and a vulnerability assessment instead of going all the way through to an adaptation plan. And so it does leave open the door that they could potentially, come back and have request more funding for, doing further planning and evaluation for that area. But it is what they submitted to us, and so feel pretty comfortable with.
Thank you. It's definitely encouraging to see this body uplifting these voices, incorporating them in the decision-making process. So just want to say a huge thank you. Thank you.
Yep, and I take Councilmember Rocha's comment on the abstention too. We'll work to ensure appropriate outreach to all tribes in a region impacted by these programs, recognizing there are overlapping and sometimes shared lands in this respect. So is there a move to adopt the proposed findings for Project 4.4 as recommended by staff?
So moved.
Okay, Controller moves. Is there a second?
Second?
Katie Landau seconds. Sarah, please call the roll.
Chair Crowfoot,
Yes.
Controller Cohen,
Aye.
Katie Landau.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. And Megan, welcome once again and congratulations on the hire. All right, next we will hear an exciting update. It's an informational item on our Environmental Justice Advisory Board. And we're going to hear from our colleague Maria Rodriguez. Hello, Maria, who is our Climate and Environmental Justice Program Manager. I'm also pleased that we'll be joined by two members of the advisory board, Frank Burton and Mario Ordonez. As we heard, they'll be joining via Zoom. So over to you, Maria.
Hi, good afternoon, council members and members of the public. I'm Maria Rodriguez, OPC's Climate and Environmental Justice Program Manager. Today I'll be presenting an informational item providing an overview of the Environmental Justice Advisory Board for California's Coast and Ocean, its purpose, the process, and it's behind its creation, engagement and collaboration with the state, and the steps ahead in advancing equity across California's ocean and coastal work. I'm also pleased to be joined, as Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, two advisory board members are here joining virtually, and our partners from Better World Group, who will share remarks following my presentation. Next slide, please. The foundation of the Environmental Justice Advisory Board is built upon the equity goals of the OPC Strategic Plan and the Equity Plan adopted in 2022. The board supports Strategic Plan Goal 2 and specifically implements Strategy 3.3.2 of the Equity Plan, which calls for direct engagement with environmental justice and tribal communities to provide recommendations that can inform OPC on how best to implement Equity Plan priorities and establish partnerships to identify regional gaps. For context, the OPC Equity Plan defines environmental justice communities as communities that are environmentally and economically stressed, that experience environmental health inequities and disparities. I'll also be referring to environmental justice as EJ throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. The EJ Advisory Board, or the board, was created to integrate the needs and perspectives of EJ communities and California Native American tribes into state ocean and coastal policies. The main purpose of the board is to provide EJ and equity expertise across these four overarching priorities. 1, to elevate ocean and coastal needs and priorities for underserved communities. 2, informing metrics and indicators to measure progress. 3, supporting equity-focused grant-making processes. And 4th, strengthening partnerships with community leaders and organizations. The board's role is advisory and does not supersede, replace, or otherwise alter existing law and opportunities for public engagement or formal tribal consultation, nor will advisory board members make or participate in making contractual or grant decisions. Next slide, please. The inaugural EJ Advisory Board consists of 7 members from diverse regions across California, as shown here on the slide. They are Frank Buncombe IV and Mario Ordóñez from the San Diego region, Carlos Moran and Patricia J. Flores Irarrázaval from the Greater Los Angeles and Orange County region, Sonia Hammonds represents the San Francisco Bay Area region, Hannah Lent represents the Central Coast, and Louis Neuner represents the North Coast region. Together, these members bring invaluable perspectives and experiences to inform state policies and programs to better address the unique needs of EJ and tribal communities. Next slide, please. In April 2023, OPC continued its partnership with Better World Group to advance implementation of key equity plan priorities. As a result, Better World Group has developed and convened the EJ Advisory Board to support and advising the state in its efforts to better address the ocean and coastal needs of California communities, including California Native American tribes and tribal communities. Better World Group led the formation, application, and selection process and now supports facilitation and administration of the board. Earlier this year, a public call for applications was released seeking candidates with lived and/or professional experience in EJ, tribal engagement, strong community connections, regional representation, and a commitment to equity in ocean and coastal policies. Additional relevant experience and expertise included, but was not limited to, grant funding and access, marine and coastal conservation, community science, and coastal access. Final selections were announced in May 2024, which included the members listed in the previous slide. Next slide, please. Regarding roles and structure, the EJ Advisory Board members serve a minimum 12-month term, renewable annually, with the inaugural board serving a 3-year term through 2027 in line with our project scope with Better World Group. Members meet quarterly with at least 2 meetings offering an in-person option. As mentioned earlier, the board provides valuable guidance in an advisory role without replacing formal public engagement processes or government-to-government tribal consultations. Next slide, please. Early contributions from this year included the board's engagement on advising on equitable grant-making strategies, recommendations on integrating equity within statewide coast and ocean health indicators, providing insights for a community science engagement strategy and human dimensions research agenda for marine protected areas, and initial input on tracking and assessing progress of the equity plan as OPC begins efforts to develop the plan's biannual assessment. In November 2024, the EJ Advisory Board finalized its charter, a co-developed effort with all partners involved, which formalizes shared principles and the board's operational structure. Next slide, please. Looking ahead to 2025, the board will continue its engagement activities to further refine equity considerations for the Ocean and Coast Report Card, engage in the equity plan's biannual assessment, provide input on OPC's 2026 to 2030 strategic plan, and continue supporting outreach through members' extensive networks to elevate statewide priorities. Next slide. So I'd like to transition now to welcome Frank and Mario, who are EJ Advisory Board members representing the San Diego region. They'll share their insights, followed by our partners at Better World Group.
Thanks, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Amazing.
Thank you for joining us.
It's an incredible honor to be here with you all today. And as Maria mentioned, my name is Mario Ordóñez Calderon. I have the honor of serving on the OPC's EJ Advisory Board, and it's just been an absolute pleasure being amongst 6 other individuals who are just dedicated to continuing to increase coastal access and push along the equitable design plans that OPC has laid out. And it's just been inspiring to be amongst individuals who all view equity as critical to being a part of ocean conservation and the protection of the coastline.
Thank you, Mario. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Buncombe IV, also from the San Diego region, and I'm honored to be a part of OPC's Environmental Justice Advisory Board. I'm in my primary work at SNS Friendly Ranch, my family's ranch here in San Diego. I lead a nonprofit dedicated to regenerative agriculture and environmental education. I also co-founded Ola Farms, which is an ocean restoration company based here in San Diego. And each of these roles give me a unique perspective that I'm able to bring to the advisory board, along with the awesome individuals that Maria and her team were able to pull together. From the land to the sea, my work has been driven with the belief that our planet is interconnected, and I love bringing this holistic view to this board to help bridge the gap between the communities and our environment, or as my hippie way of calling her mother, and ensuring that our policies at the state level reflect the diverse needs of our ecosystems and the communities they support. So thank you all for the work that you all do, and for allowing myself, Mario, and our other group of individuals to just be one more layer to tie the community into these policies. Thank you.
Big thanks to you both for your service and leadership on this council. We're really excited that it now exists, and your input and insight is actually helping shape investments and policies, programs that we're developing. So we may have some questions for you in a little bit, but I want to enable opportunities for public comment first, if that's okay.
Can we just, before we do that, can we let Better World Group make their comments, and then I'll close, and then we can...
Sure.
Here I am. Good afternoon, members of the council. Can you all hear me all right?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you. So my name's Irene Takako-Farr. I'm a senior associate at Better World Group. We're based here in Los Angeles, and it's a pleasure to join you all virtually today. I also wanted to let you all know that I'm joined virtually by my colleagues Elena Ortiz, who is now pinned on the screen, as well as Shaylin Franco, who is here off screen. On behalf of our team, we just wanted to say that we're very grateful for the opportunity to speak before you once again. The last time we met with the council was in October 2022, when the OPC Equity Plan was unanimously adopted, thanks to your strong support. And since then, we've had the privilege to continue our partnership with OPC, engaging community leaders and uplifting the needs of priority communities to support the state's ambitious goals in the equity plan. So today we're thrilled to celebrate the progress of the Environmental Justice Advisory Board and its role to advise on statewide ocean and coastal policy and actions. Through our partnership with OPC, Better World Group formed the advisory board to play a key role in providing the state with input and guidance and recommendations that can best inform implementation of the equity plan, as well as the equity goals outlined in OPC's strategic plan. And the members of the board each have unique and deep roots within their communities through lived and professional experience. And yeah, just really thrilled again, Mario and Frank, to have had a chance to speak about their priorities in the San Diego region. And we'll share that sentiment is reflected across each of the regions that are represented as part of this advisory board. As Maria shared earlier, we've engaged this board on a number of key topics this year. Moving forward, looking into 2025, the advisory board members will resume engagement activities in the next year. For example, providing input on performance measures and recommendations for the equity plan's biennial assessment, now that it's been 2 years since implementation. And looking ahead, we're continuing to scope opportunities for their expertise to inform statewide efforts, which might include advising on community science, research questions, and regional climate priorities. So we're excited about the advisory board's ongoing role in collaborating with OPC and state partners to share insights that can improve shaping inclusive and impactful ocean and coastal policies for the betterment of all California communities. And with that, I'll pass it back to Maria, and thank you again for your time today.
Thanks, Irene. I think we had a wrap-up slide. I just wanted to flag, we have more information on our website, which will come up when the slide's up. There we go. Yeah, so wrapping up, yeah, I want to emphasize the value of the board and what it brings as a model for how partnerships and community-driven insights can advance equity and resilience in California's coastal policies and programs. And folks can learn more through visiting our webpage, where we have a webpage set up for the EJ Advisory Board. Thank you all. Thank you, council members and the public, for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you, council members. And hopefully you can stick around because we may have questions for you here, but we wanted to move to public comment. So again, if you are in our auditorium and want to make public comment, I invite you to come forward to the podium. If you're joining by Zoom, please click on the raise hand feature and raise your virtual hand. And if you're joining by phone, you can press #2 in order to get in the queue. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carla Garibay Garcia. I am with the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And I just wanted to thank you for prioritizing the EJ Advisory Board. A few years ago, back when I was working for Azul, an organization that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, I had the pleasure of contributing to the equity plan, and I just know that prioritizing tribes and environmental justice and equity in this way is just something that we're going to be really proud of to have done, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your contribution a couple years ago to the equity plan and those comments as well. Let's move to any virtual public comment.
No online comment. Thank you.
Great. Well, I wanted to ask a question, if I could, start us off, and that is to Frank and Mario, if they're still on. And that is, just to speak really candidly, you know, what do you want to see, what do you want to see changed? What can we do better? What sort of tangible outcomes do you hope that your input provides compared to how we've done things at the state of California historically?
I'll jump in, Mario, quickly, passionately, and briefly. Obviously, Mario and I are both down here in San Diego. The big one, the big ticket item in San Diego is the Tijuana River. Particularly, my family's ranch, where I run and live on, is 200 feet north of one of the main channels of the river. So when the pollution is heavy, I'm feeling it and smelling it and ingesting it. And I've been living on the land here for about 2 years, for a little over 2 years. And my health, my respiratory issues, my asthma that I haven't had an issue with since I was 11 years old has come back. I just bought my first inhaler for since almost 2 decades. So I'm very much feeling that and hoping that as there's been more public attention come into it, that we can truly rally the statewide efforts that we need to solve is a simple word to a very complex set of issues with all the interconnected, multi-agency, multinational. But I'll pause there. I said I was going to be brief and I didn't. But definitely Toronto River issue.
No, that was very important, and it was pretty brief, but it didn't have to be because it's a critical issue, as Controller Cohen brought up.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And just to build off of that, being down here in San Diego, you know, there's a lot of, I got into this space from, you know, just wanting to connect kids to the water and to the healing power that happens within that, and all the community that you can build from just being around the ocean. And there's a lot of kids down in Imperial Beach, down in southern San Diego and South Bay who don't have the opportunity to do that right now. So I'm here, you know, prioritizing their voices and their health. And yeah, I think that first and foremost, I think that y'all are doing a great job at starting to think about and implementing community outreach beyond the coastline so that the voices of inland communities are heard when it comes to policy decision making along the coastline. And I think that I want to see that continued, and as well as helping to support equitable coastal access, because I think that that is something that is still in the works.
Yeah, thanks, Mario. I would very much agree. We're working to prioritize what we call outdoors for all, which includes, enabling more Californians to actually access the coast, particularly communities that haven't enjoyed that access. And while we've made some progress, there's so much more work ahead. So thanks for lifting that up. Others on the council? Megan.
First, I would just like to thank the folks on the Equity Council for their contribution and participation, and appreciate this council here for elevating the space for those voices to be heard. And so I think it's really great to see this and have their voice be integrated into our work. So thank you. I'm just kind of wondering about how priorities for their work are identified, and then more specifically, how we ensure their voice is heard in the strategic planning process and what the nexus is for that input.
I can speak to the first, and then maybe you can answer the second part. So we work together to prepare agendas and co-develop agendas. So we have pieces of our quarterly meetings where they are able to provide updates and raise any priority items that they would want to discuss. So it's not just like, state heavy. Granted, the equity plan was guided by community leaders. So a lot of pretty much the essential, the whole main equity plan is driven by community informed needs, right? So a lot of those state priorities kind of, they fold into our efforts here. But it is a co-developed structure. I think we're still learning to refine it since it's our first time engaging this board at this level. This first year was pretty short and preliminary, and a lot of the efforts are going to roll over into next year. And then at the same time, we're looking for other opportunities. Staff have some program areas that may flow in and come into this work. But it really is open to, across all our work. And also we also share a lot of this knowledge with like our other state coastal, sister agency partners. So it's pretty fluid and broad how this information or knowledge exchange can be made, right?
I can speak to the strategic plan piece. So we gave the Environmental Justice Advisory Board a heads up that we were starting this process at our last meeting. We have an in-person meeting with them at the end of January, so I'd like to agendize this so we can have a deeper discussion with them. And then I really want to utilize their relationships within their communities to help us get the word out, to make sure that we can maximize attendance in these in-person meetings, and for folks who aren't able to attend in person, letting them know that we have this online form or other mechanisms to provide input to us. So those are all the ways that we want to leverage their expertise.
I'll say thank you for those remarks, and it's good to hear that their work is also impacting other state agencies. That's really wonderful. So you're sort of getting the most out of their input as possible across the state. So thank you.
Yeah, and just to answer on the outcome-driven thing, like how their information gets embedded, we keep them appraised at all times of where things are in the progress. And so we'll also have, if things go publicly, they'll be posted on the webpage. We also make status updates on our executive director's report. And right now, as we're going through the biannual assessment, that's another opportunity to have more of our outcomes available for the public once that's available.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on your comments, Megan, I feel like we have made good progress in certain areas as it relates to building tribal partnerships, but then also creating more opportunity and ensuring equity. But I'm really eager to institutionalize the work. And so I think with the strategic plan, we have a really good opportunity to figure out ways that we sort of bake in these priorities, but also the process to ensure that, the work, the investments, the decisions are being shaped by broader communities than in the past. So that's just something I'm hoping that the OPC staff can consider is like, it's so great that now this advisory, group is bringing these priorities to bear and then making suggestions. And then I'm really hoping that we institutionalize this. We talk about making best practices common practices and standard practices. And I'm hoping we can model that at OPC that then other, state agencies can, I don't want to say learn from, but hopefully emulate.
I agree.
Anyone else? Well, huge thanks. This is a big milestone, and it's something we're really proud of, so thank you very much, Maria. We're going to move on to item number... We're going to move on to item number 6, which is an informational and an action item, and it's specifically how we advance 30 by 30. Again, this commitment to conserve, protect 30% of our lands, our coastal waters in California by 2030. How we advance 30 by 30 in coastal waters. And we're joined by Abby Mohan and Ann Deep, both program managers on our 30 by 30 work. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. As you introduced, my name is Ann Deep. I'm one of the 30 by 30 program managers.
My name is Abby Mohan, and I'm the other 30 by 30 program manager. And like you said, we'll be presenting both an informational update and a request for funding. We're going to do both presentations together, and then at the end, we'll take public comment and questions on both items.
And then I would ask you, you're sharing a mic so that the person talking stand in front of the mic, because then that'll ensure that our people watching from home can hear us.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so following up on our presentation in June, when we presented the draft decision-making framework, we're here to give you an update on the framework and also on the public engagement process that was after that, and some next steps for 30 by 30. The California's 30 by 30 initiative will create and expand enduring conservation measures across a broad range of landscapes and seascapes, and OPC is leading this in the coastal waters. We have 4 strategies: adaptively managing our state MPA network, enhancing conservation and national marine sanctuaries, exploring the role of other spatial management measures, and supporting tribally led conservation, including indigenous marine stewardship areas. Next slide, please. The draft framework we presented in June laid out a process for how to evaluate candidate 30 by 30 conservation areas to see if they meet the definition of 30 by 30 areas. This process involved applying international guidance on evaluating the effectiveness of conservation and the likely outcomes for biodiversity for area-based management. Next slide, please.
All right. Can you guys move just a little bit closer to the mic? I'm getting some signals from the back of the room. Thank you.
All right, I will speak up. All right, thank you so much, Abby. So the presentation of the decision-making framework at the June 4th council meeting launched a 120-day public comment period and tribal consultation period. This process engaged over 1,000 people, and in-person workshops held in San Diego, Monterey, Arcata provided interested members of the public with an important opportunity to provide feedback on the draft framework, the ability to discuss local threats to coastal marine biodiversity, and identify ways in which 30 by 30 could support conservation in their region. Next slide, please. So before I deep dive into the regional workshop summaries, we just want to say that we deeply value and appreciate the insightful feedback received during the public comment period and tribal consultation, and are currently reviewing all submissions to thoughtfully incorporate this input into the final framework. And so I'm really happy to share that a highlight that we saw is that a resounding agreement across all parties that biodiversity should be the main priority for advancing 30 by 30. In addition, we also heard about the importance of watershed scale conservation, estuaries and land sea connection, the emphasis on water quality and addressing land-based threats, benefits of climate resilience and mitigation to 30 by 30 conservation areas. We also heard a lot of questions about what comes next, so beyond designation as a 30 by 30 conservation area. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, running concurrent with our public comment period was our tribal consultation period, which ended in November for 150 days. We received feedback at the very first in-person regional workshop to dedicate spaces to tribal conversations. And so mirroring the public comment process, we held 3 in-person and 1 virtual tribal roundtable. We had participation from 14 unique tribes through our roundtables and government-to-government consultation meetings on the draft framework, and we deeply thank our tribal partners for their time and feedback on the draft framework. Following the adoption of the final framework, OPC staff will begin evaluating candidate 30 by 30 conservation areas and work to identify potential new conservation measures to address major threats to biodiversity in coastal waters in partnership with agency, tribes, and local communities. This review will be continuous as candidate sites are nominated. Next slide, please. From our tribal roundtables and consultations, we heard loud and clear that supporting tribally led stewardship is key to advancing 30 by 30 and protecting our coastal marine resources. More specifically, we heard the need for integrating traditional ecological knowledges, or TEK, into the evaluation process, clear guidance for state actions towards supporting Indigenous marine stewardship areas, or IMSAs, emphasis on the importance of land-sea connections, watersheds, and estuaries, as well as concerns about impacts of offshore wind to cultural and natural resources. Next slide, please. So OPC is very grateful for the constructive feedback received from tribes during consultation on the draft decision-making framework. We understand the need to better integrate tribal perspectives and traditional knowledges into the final decision-making framework and subsequent implementation of 30 by 30. We recognize that tribal voices were not included in our 30 by 30 technical advisory panel. So moving forward, we are planning and restructuring a new approach to receiving advice and guidance on 30 by 30 implementation, and we'll be bringing tribal experts and knowledge holders into this new process in the beginning as we move to the next phase of 30 by 30. Additionally, as we finalize the decision-making framework, we will be developing a third pathway for evaluation alongside MPAs and OECMs that is focused specifically on areas stewarded by tribes. So we will be working to explicitly include traditional knowledges as a critical source of information in the final framework, alongside working with state and federal fishery managers and members of the technical advisory panel to apply rigorous science-based standards as set by the MPA guide to the California context. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Anne. Staff anticipate bringing the final framework to the March council meeting for consideration and possible adoption. After the adoption of the framework, we will begin evaluating candidate areas, and the results of these evaluations are expected by summer 2025. New 30 by 30 conservation areas will be announced in the annual Pathways Progress Reports, and OPC staff looks forward to sharing updates and progress with the council at regular intervals. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for listening to our informational update on 30 by 30. So now we are going to transition to item 6B. Next slide, please. All right, now we're going to talk about funding for priorities to advance 30 by 30 in coastal waters. Next slide, please. So California's 30 by 30 initiative seeks to create and expand enduring conservation measures across a broad range of seascapes. This effort drives and aligns with broader state commitments to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion, and strengthen tribal partnerships. Next slide, please. OPC will solicit proposals in 3 priority areas. Overall, these investments in science, restoration, and stewardship will strengthen and advance biodiversity in state coastal waters and advance the state's 30 by 30 initiative. OPC will support work that occurs in designated or potential 30 by 30 conservation areas, and we will work with project applicants to ensure that the project outcomes aligns with the final decision-making framework when adopted. OPC will also support work outside of 30 by 30 conservation areas where such work can be considered a complementary conservation measure per pathways. In other words, actions that will not quantified within a 30 by 30 acreage target are essential to long-term conservation success. All right, let's look into each priority. Next slide, please. The first priority is action-oriented science, and we intend to allocate $2 million for this. However, I will make the note that these funding allocations may shift depending on the application received under each funding priority. This priority builds upon the recommendations from Appendix E to the Pathways Report, Science Needs for Advancing Coastal Waters, 30 by 30. California's coastal and marine ecosystems currently face a multitude of threats, including more frequent and more intense disturbances, sea level rise, ocean acidification, marine disease, invasive species, pollution, and in some cases, overharvest of marine resources. To effectively conserve 30% of coastal waters by 2030, the state requires an improved understanding of how these threats are currently impacting biodiversity and how their intensity and distribution may change in the future. As OPC moves through the evaluation of candidate areas, research to address science and knowledge gaps will both support the evaluation of current and the identification of future conservation priorities for 30 by 30, in addition to advancing many of OPC's strategic plan goals. Research findings will also improve the conservation outcomes of 30 by 30 conservation areas. Next slide, please. Priority number 2 is expanding and accelerating local environmental restoration and stewardship, and we intend to allocate $4 million for this. This priority is informed by Pathway 6 from the Pathways to 30 by 30 report. And safeguarding California's biodiversity for decades to come will not be achieved by simply protecting intact habitats. So restoring and stewarding ecosystem functions across a broad array of coastal and marine habitats, including increasing connectivity between these habitats, is essential to help imperiled species recover and enable ecosystems to thrive even amidst climate change. Next slide, please. Our third priority is restoring and revitalizing tribally led stewardship, and we intend to allocate $4 million for this priority area. These awards will solely go to tribes and nonprofits working directly with tribes. This investment comes as part of OPC's commitments made in our tribal engagement strategy to support tribally led stewardship and uplift tribal knowledges and expertise. A key conservation priority for California's 30 by 30 initiative is improving California Native American tribes' connection, ownership, stewardship, and uses of ancestral and traditional areas that are central not only to tribal identity and sovereignty, but also biodiversity protection and ecosystem function. 30 by 30 aims to develop meaningful and mutually beneficial opportunities for tribal management and co-management within coastal watersheds and marine waters. Next slide, please. So pending council approval to disperse funds to advance these 3 priorities, we anticipate releasing a request for proposals in January 2025 with letters of intent due in February and final proposals in March 2025. For funding priority 3, restoring and revitalizing tribal-led stewardship, final proposals will also be accepted until July 2025, providing additional time and flexibility for tribal applicants. Proposals will undergo a structured competitive review process led by OPC. Projects selected through this review process will be brought to the council for funding consideration of grant awards for all 3 priorities at the June 2025 council meeting and the September 2025 council meeting for projects received under funding priority 3, tribal projects, that applied at the second deadline offered in July. Following council approval of the grant awards, the anticipated start date of selected projects are anticipated in fall and winter 2025. The duration of project requested is anticipated to be 2 years, although requests for 1-year awards is highly encouraged. And next slide, please. Thank you so much for the update, and Ann and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I want to move to public comment next, if we could. Once again, if you're interested in making public comment and you're here in the room, please come to the podium. If you're on Zoom, raise your virtual hand. And if you are on the phone, you can press #2 to be recognized. We've got some public commenters here in the room. Welcome.
Hi, is it possible to request 4 minutes instead of 2?
Why don't you, I'll try to be liberal with the usage of your time, but if you can just go forward. I don't want to create a precedent right now, but why don't you just go ahead?
So good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot, council members, and OPC staff. My name is Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg, and I'm the president of Coastal Policy Solutions, where I work with nonprofits and other partners throughout California to protect the coast for people and wildlife. Joining me on the comments today are the Pew Charitable Trust and California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, organizations with whom I've been working over the past year to ensure that bays and estuaries are adequately protected as part of the California's 30 by 30 process, including the co-creation of an estuary-focused policy letter that should appear in your packet. I'd like to start with heartfelt gratitude to OPC staff who've been working on the draft 30 by 30 framework. Abby, Ann, Mike, you've all been thoughtful, engaging, and committed to helping the state achieve its 30 by 30 goals.
As you know, estuaries are powerhouses of climate mitigation and adaptation. They provide nursery and feeding habitat to myriad species, including the newly designated official state crustacean, the Dungeness crab. And because they exist at the land-sea interface, they risk being inadequately protected by policies focused on either land or water. So we were very pleased to see that in this item, in the staff update, it highlighted, quote, the importance of watersheds, estuaries, and the land-sea connection, and the importance of water quality and the need to address land-based threats. These were key points delivered by the expert scientific working group, Bay and Estuary Science Towards 30 by 30, whose full comment letter should also appear in your packet. One of their main points was some specific ways to update the IUCN site tool and the MPA guide for use in California, and we encourage you to operationalize those recommendations by inserting them into the final 30 by 30 framework. Regarding next steps, please consider the following 2 points. The first is that in the final framework, please articulate how candidate areas will be handled if they don't currently meet 30 by 30 standards, but may meet the standards if changes are made. If a site doesn't currently meet the criteria, it should be eligible for future consideration, but should not be counted until new policy or management actions are taken. To uphold the principle of durable conservation, OPC must make these determinations objectively, even when they don't fully align with the perspectives of other state or federal agencies. And we encourage you to adhere rigorously to your process. Lastly, OPC should feel empowered to recommend specific habitat, water quality, and other natural resource policy changes that, if enacted, could credibly and durably contribute to the state's 30 by 30 goals. That is, we're reminded of OPC's Enabling Public Resources Code, which reads that the council shall identify and recommend to the legislature changes in law needed to improve the effectiveness of state efforts to protect ocean resources. Clear policy change is in the purview of OPC, and we encourage action in this regard. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tomás Valadez. I am the California Policy Associate with Azul. I want to express our support for the funding of up to $10 million to fund projects that advance 30 by 30 in coastal waters by supporting action-oriented science, expanding restoration, and tribal stewardship areas. I would also like to thank OPC staff who have worked on the 30 by 30 framework. We do, however, have some concerns regarding the draft framework. The draft framework provides that lightly protected areas, as long as they include both an access benefit and a climate resilience benefit, will count towards 30 by 30 conserved target. We believe this is inconsistent with the state's definition of conserved, which says that a 30 by 30 conservation area is durably protected and managed to sustain functional ecosystems, both intact and restored, and the diversity of life that they support. Highly and fully protected MPAs are far more effective than other types of protections at conserving biodiversity, protecting ecosystem structure and function, and have the potential to enhance ecosystem resilience in the face of climate change. As currently drafted, the draft framework would permit a low standard of protection to be considered conserved, an act that could have national and international implications for the 30 by 30 initiative. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Keith Rutzart. I'm with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project in Monterey. And at the April 2023 meeting, I asked you if the $5.4 million in funding for accelerating kelp restoration and restoration efforts was available for kelp restoration and research. We were told the restoration could be definitely funded. But when I submitted letters of interest and a full application, the Sea Grant reviewers asked me, where's your control? I attended a grant webinar and asked if we needed to obtain permission before applying for a grant. We were assured we did not need permission at the time that we applied. But then the Sea Grant reviewer said, well, you don't have permission. The last funding opportunity gave us a great optimism, and we made an honest attempt to engage with OPC because the funding seemed aimed right at our grassroots restoration organization. But we learned that OPC prefers to do research and not restoration. Real kelp restoration efforts in Monterey by concerned volunteer divers at Tankers Reef were stopped, in large part because of a joint letter from OPC urging the Fish and Game Commission to kill an 11-acre kelp forest for the sake of scientific research. Kelp restoration is not permitted anywhere in California, only research. So this agenda item includes $4 million for watershed scale restoration and also kelp restoration, which you really don't permit inside or outside of marine protected areas. So I ask you to please don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And let's learn by doing. Another one of your key points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And as we move, as we move to public comment online, I think at least some of those comments may be most relevantly addressed in the next item regarding the disbursement of funds to support adaptive management and resilience of kelp forests. So I'm going to put a pin in public comment, but ask colleagues to respond during the next agenda item. Why don't we move to public comment, any public comment online?
We have 13 public commenters online. We'll start with caller ending in 5936. Caller 5936, you have the floor and you are unmuted.
Secretary Crowfoot, Controller Cohen, and council members. Eileen Bogan, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, speaking on my own behalf. For 30 by 30, I would like to thank the Ocean Protection Council for collaborating with the U.S. Geological Survey on its California Ocean Beach Erosion Modeling Tool. Unfortunately, San Francisco does not appear to be interested in this current science or with established science, such as the USGS sand mining study, which links sand mining in San Francisco Bay to erosion and accretion on the coast from San Francisco to Pacifica. For 30 by 30, also urging state agencies to address climate change and sea level rise in the context of public safety and economic vitality. Public safety in terms of earthquakes and wildfires would mean emergency vehicle routes, mass evacuation routes, and routes for mutual aid. Public safety issues were front and center during the tsunami alert on December 5th. Public safety would also mean insurability, as California is experiencing an insurance crisis. Economic vitality would mean disadvantaged and immigrant communities being able to access economic opportunities. And finally, for 30 by 30, advocating that the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary be included in California's 30 by 30 marine areas, along with the area off San Francisco's Ocean Beach, which is being proposed as a non-contiguous area within the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Chris Voss, followed by Greg Helms. Chris, you are now unmuted and you have the floor.
Yeah, good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Chris Voss, and I'm president of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, and I'm also a 7C working group member that is Coastal Commission sponsored process to address offshore wind's impacts on commercial fishers. And what I'd like to state in relationship to 3030's impact on fishermen and fishing communities is that while we're dealing with the effects climate change has on the marine environment, we're trying to adapt to a federal effort to repurpose the marine environment for offshore wind uses and aquaculture opportunity areas, as well as a state effort to determine what spaces are available in state waters for wave energy projects. So those are two initiatives that have the ultimate effect of repurposing a lot of fishing grounds for other activities. And so over time, we've adapted also to the existing MPA network at the Channel Islands here in Santa Barbara, as well as the statewide network that includes 16% of state waters protected durably. What I'd like to point out is the implementation of the Marine Life Management Act and the federal effort of implementing the Magnuson-Stevens Act through the council process has been effective in sustainably managing our fish populations and our marine resources. And the space between MPAs is in fact durably regulated for sustainability. And with the Marine Life Management Act, we're obligated to protect a functioning marine ecosystem. And whenever management changes are proposed, they're done with the guidelines of the Marine Life Management Act to effectively achieve our obligation to protect the ecosystem. So I just like to draw attention to this initiative that could preclude fishing activity to an additional 14% of the state's waters, and the impact that will have on fishermen and coastal communities is significant, and I hope doesn't get overlooked, and that we are doing a good job in managing our fisheries sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Greg Helms. Greg, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon, council members. Greg Helms with Ocean Conservancy here. Really appreciate the opportunity to address this, and I wanted to share in the thanks to the OPC family and staff for all the outreach and keeping us plugged in. It's been really exceptional work. We share the vision of a California state network of biodiversity and climate resilience zones to build on and extend the backbone of MPAs that we have under the Marine Life Protection Act, to include water quality protections to address stressors and contaminants in our estuaries and bays, shipping threats perhaps, as well as places where fish and wildlife protections result from fishery management and other sort of active protections. Those are excellent opportunities for securing the goals of 30 by 30. We offered a lot of written comments on candidate areas that are in other spatial zones, OECMs and so on. These are areas where you have some protection, intentional or otherwise, but also, importantly, management partners where the opportunity is there to work together to secure biodiversity and access and climate protections. These are a setup for the classic Ocean Protection Council role to sort of unify and silo and coordinate a whole of state government effort. So I really want to head up that, to highlight that opportunity. And to make sure that that's, you make the most of that, we really want to urge the council to look broadly into state authorities and mechanisms that can be brought to really bring state influence and leadership into these areas where you can really elevate the role of other partners in securing broad cross-cutting benefits and so on. So we just want to leave you with that, and certainly I'm supportive of the three areas for grant making. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ricky Erickson, followed by Alberto Rivera. Ricky, you are unmuted and you have the floor. Ricky, please unmute yourself.
Sorry for that. Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot, council members, and OPC staff. My name is Ricky Erickson, marine ecologist at the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, where we've been working to help identify ways that California's coastal ecosystems are protected through the 30 by 30 process. Efforts include the establishment of a West Coast OECM working group, as well as contributing to the best 30 by 30, as mentioned by Rebecca Schlesberg. We fully support state funding to advance 30 by 30 and appreciate truly the hard work that the OPC staff has put into this. We hope you will consider the following in the final framework. As a first step, we encourage the state to conduct a gap analysis of current biodiversity protections to ensure that rare and remnant habitat types are represented in the state's 30 by 30 calculations. The availability of recent habitat maps, remote sensing of our kelp forests, sea level rise projections, all of this allows us to assess how well our current management measures represent California's marine diversity. Secondly, we look forward to more details on the approach for how existing areas will be evaluated and prioritized for considered as counting. Given the diversity of ecosystems, we hope that the state will adopt an approach that can evaluate the biodiversity contributions of each ecosystem as well as stressors to that system. Finally, we encourage the OPC to provide more details on how candidate sites will be addressed and improved to meet our goals. On behalf of the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, we all look forward to working with you to credibly and durably contribute to California's 30 by 30 goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alberto Rivera, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alberto Rivera. I'm a lab manager and researcher at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I wish you could see me. This is my first time giving public comment, so I actually just want to thank Controller Cohen for your presence at the State Lands Commission meeting in Imperial Beach and for all your opening remarks for today's meeting, as that's what makes me feel empowered to give public comment today. I additionally just want to mention that at this meeting, there was a community member from Tijuana River in which she she spoke in Spanish. So just kind of reiterating her message here. Forgive me, as I was supposed to give public comment in the last agenda item too, so I'm mixing in a few points here, so bear with me. But she was saying that in her lifetime over at the Tijuana River estuary, it was actually manufacturing companies that take advantage of cheaper labor costs in Mexico and take advantage of lenient waste removal and handling processes. However, at an MPA Collaborative Network meeting regarding 30 by 30, I also overhear fishermen communities and a very particular individual that mentions that the responsibility falls on Mexican citizens for the pollution that's traveling upwards towards Point Loma. So why do I bring all of this up? Well, I have been co-developing an educational program called Conservation Leadership for the underserved communities of San Diego, which will lead high school students through 3 particular phases: ocean literacy workshops, some recreational dive certifications, as well as lastly, and most importantly, community engagement projects. Just as in these meetings, multiple stakeholder perspectives are shared, and students will be able to present in their experiences with community projects at a symposium at UCSD at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Personally, as someone who grew up as an inner-city youth in South Central Los Angeles, I consider myself lucky providing comment at this meeting. I never thought I would get the experience of diving thanks to pursuing my graduate education, although I indebted myself beyond the possibility of recovery. Diving is costly and has an extremely high barrier of entry, the cost. To fish, my dad and I would use $5, and dive gear costs about $1,000. So advocacy for breaking this barrier of entry is needed. This barrier of entry should be invested in, as decades-long issues like the Tijuana River estuary situation could have been solved by a student from the community with particular training, and in border towns who need equitable access to our oceans to participate in this sort of program. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Zoe Collins, followed by Larry Phillips. Zoe, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot and council members, and thank you so much for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Zoe Collins, and I'm the Marine Protected Area Program Coordinator at Heal the Bay, where I manage LA's chapter of MPA Watch and other community science events and programs. Our organization is excited by and supportive of the Unparalleled 30 by 30 initiative and would like to begin by thanking the council for the diligent coordination of this momentous effort. We would like to take today's opportunity to comment to raise several concerns regarding the 30 by 30 decision-making framework. Our primary concern lies within the lightly protected candidates for 30 by 30. Areas that are lightly protected should not count towards California's 30 by 30 objective, regardless of whether it has a climate resilience and an access benefit. Science shows that the performance of lightly protected areas is highly dependent on context, and the benefits to biodiversity, effects to exploited species, and climate resilience are substantially decreased in minimally protected areas. The primary outcome of any 30 by 30 conserved area should be the conservation of biodiversity. So we urge you to reconsider designating these areas, especially in the context of California's strong influence on the caliber of marine legislation nationwide and beyond. We would also like to request that the final framework includes an access framework and criteria, as these marine spaces are critical to the health and well-being of many groups and individuals. While we commend the OPC's technical advisory panel specification of access priorities, we would ultimately like to see a more elaborate criteria developed. And finally, we would like to express support of the use of the MPA guide and the IUCN OECM. The MPA guide is a peer-reviewed tool that has been coordinated with much thought and care, and we're grateful to see it weighed heavily within the framework. However, we would like to request clarification regarding the OPC's attempt to tailor this MPA guide to the California context, which we fear could cause a major departure from the original scientific rigor of the document that was designed to be highly adaptable. And thank you again for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you.
Next, we have Larry Phillips, followed by Anupa Asokan. Larry, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. My name is Larry Phillips, and I cover Pacific Fisheries Policy for the American Sport Fishing Association. Thanks for an opportunity here to the council. First of all, I just want to appreciate Michael and Abby and others on the OPC team for just this transparent and open process. We did provide a written comment letter a while ago, so I'll refer you back to that, but I did want to provide a couple other comments. The recreational fishing community acknowledges the global challenge and loss of biodiversity. We look forward to collectively advocating for resources to address the issues that are impacting biodiversity, mainly stormwater runoff, increased turbidity, aquatic invasive species, toxic algal blooms, and others. I do want to share a quick story. When I first came on with ASA, it was in California, and I was watching the news, and I saw a warning that was telling folks not to go in the water because of toxic water conditions. And that, to me, just was a pretty powerful statement. I did want to share a couple of perspectives from our industry. We were one of the first to sign on with America the Beautiful at the federal level, 30 by 30 under the Biden administration. But we continue to struggle with the concept that fishing is somehow not compatible with the state's version of 30 by 30. As others have pointed out, Magnuson Stevens, and specifically the Pacific Fisheries Management Council and CDFW, it represents the most inclusive and transparent platform in the world relative to developing and implementing fishing regulations that are based on the needs of based on stock assessments and the needs of the resource. I can't think of anything more profound than the 1.3 million recreational anglers in California advocating for the issues that are important. So we continue to want to be partners with OPC and others to advocate for the issues that are causing the declines in biodiversity. And again, it's a difficult process that we're in right now, and we look forward to hopefully the national marine sanctuaries that are current state waters being included ultimately in the state's version of or included as durably protected under 30 by 30. Again, thank you for the time.
Thank you very much for your time and engagement.
Next, we have Anupa Asokan, followed by Sandy Ellsworth. Anupa, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Anupa Asokan. I'm the founder and executive director of Fish On, a new organization dedicated to advancing ocean conservation on behalf of recreational and subsistence fishing communities in California and across the United States. We're also the leading voice in environmental justice and equitable access issues for marginalized fishing communities, and are really grateful for your work to help advance 30 by 30 in California's coastal waters. I first want to emphasize the significant opportunity for 30 by 30 to support shore-based subsistence fishing communities in California. Fishery management measures largely ignore this subset of the fishing community, and they also don't meet the standard of durable protection set forward by the state. This was recently came to light with the state's proposal to open 10 square miles of Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary to bottom trawling, which is one of the most damaging forms of commercial fishing. And while fishery management is essential, it only accounts for less than 1% of California's marine species. Meaningful implementation of 30 by 30 through durable area-based management is how we protect biodiversity and ecosystems through climate change. And to that end, we at Fish On support the use of the MPA guide to evaluate areas and hope OPC will reconsider the idea that lightly protected areas confer biodiversity benefits. There's overwhelming scientific evidence that shows that it's fully and highly protected areas in the ocean that 30 by 30. And at Fish On, we believe that these areas are also essential for more equitable access to California's ocean for all communities, including anglers and spearfishers. So thank you for your time, and please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sandy Ellsworth, followed by Pamela Hetherington. Sandy, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot, council members, and OPC staff. My name is Sandy Aylesworth, and I'm Director of the Pacific Initiative with NRDC. As Chair Crowfoot noted in his opening remarks, there is a need for greater and more ambitious leadership in implementing the Global 30 by 30 goal. As a member of the Subnational High Ambition Task Force, California understands its key role in stemming ocean biodiversity loss. We commend the OPC staff for their intent to ensure that the final framework will reflect the state's strong definition of conserved, and we really wanted to thank them for their tireless work on the framework. As OPC finalizes the framework, we wanted to highlight 2 points from our comment letter. The first is that lightly protected areas should not count toward California's goal. Counting lightly protected areas is not supported by the science and is inconsistent with the state's definition of conserved. Lightly protected areas allow for moderate levels of impact from 6 out of 7 harmful activities. There is scant evidence to support that this level of protection offers the benefits for biodiversity conservation, ecosystem function, and climate resilience the state's 30 by 30 initiative calls for. The second point is that we support the use of the IUCN site-level tool for identifying other effective area-based conservation measures. However, use of the IUCN site-level tool must be accompanied by the use of an evaluative framework that's science-based to assess likely biodiversity outcomes of an OECM. Finally, NRDC wishes to emphasize that the primary purpose of the 30 by 30 initiative is biodiversity conservation. This is categorically different from the purpose of fisheries management, which is to achieve maximum sustainable yield for a specific fishery, which is about removal of fish biomass from the ocean. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Pamela Hetherington, followed by Samuel Casillas. Pamela, you have the floor.
Thank you kindly. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, council members, OPC staff, my colleagues in, under, and around the coastal areas. I am Pam Hetherington from the Environmental Center of San Diego, co-lead of the 30 by 30 San Diego Regional Group, and part of the Ocean Subcommittee for the Power in Nature. In order for there to be fisheries to manage, the 30 by 30 conserved areas must be centered around biodiversity conservation. Coastal biodiversity is crucial for maintaining healthy fish populations. Many commercially important fish species, such as those in the food chain, depend on the habitats and resources provided by coastal ecosystems for breeding, feeding, and shelter. Loss of biodiversity in these areas can lead to the collapse of local fisheries impacting food, security, and livelihoods. Protecting coastal biodiversity helps preserve unique species, many of which could be at risk of extinction due to habitat destruction, overfishing, and of course, climate change. And I want to end with just a request or maybe a suggestion that when the Ocean Protection Council comes into a regional group area, if you could notify the leaders of the 30 by 30 efforts in those regions that you're collaborating with the tribes, it would be very helpful for those of us that don't have that kind of reach. So thank you kindly for your time and attention.
Thank you for that input.
Next, we have Samuel Casillas, followed by Katie O'Donnell. Samuel, you have the floor.
Hi, my name is Samuel Casillas. I'm the president of the Pacifica Land Trust. I want to make you all aware that the Pacifica Land Trust was recently awarded $120,000 from the State Coastal Conservancy to undertake the Pacifica Coastal Resiliency Opportunity Study, which consists of preparing studies, surveys, and other reports, including we'll be doing community engagement as well to identify opportunities for nature-based sea level rise resiliency projects throughout the city of Pacifica. Through this, we do believe that eventually would by the state. So with that, this is obviously the study is just the opportunity study is just the first phase of what we're doing. We'll be looking for acquisitions and then also restoration of wetlands here in Pacifica. So as all this is going to be aligned with the 30 by 30 project, I do hope that we find opportunities to be able to partner and find alignment with OPC as well as we move forward. And then hopefully be able to share knowledge and resources to do this and look around for the overall benefits that we could apply from the 30 by 30 goals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Katie O'Donnell, followed by Josefina Barantes. Katie, you have the floor.
Chair Crowfoot, council members, and OPC staff, thank you for this opportunity to make comment. My name is Katie O'Donnell, and I am the U.S. Ocean Conservation Manager at Wild Coast. Wild Coast is an international team that conserves coastal and marine ecosystems and addresses climate change through natural solutions. In California, we partner with state agencies, community members, fishers, other NGOs, and researchers to improve the state's marine protected areas through partnership programs such as MPA Watch Community Science Volunteer Program and data collection. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank OPC, particularly Abby, Ann, and Michael for their continued and thoughtful solicitation of public feedback throughout this process. I also would like to comment on the 30 by 30 draft framework. We are concerned about the draft framework that would potentially permit too low of a protection standard to be considered conserved. There is, echoing many other commenters from this public comment period, there is little evidence to show that lightly protected areas offer benefits for biodiversity, ecosystem function, and climate resilience that the state's 30 by 30 initiative was created to bring. For instance, as an example, the Tijuana River Mouth State Marine Conservation Area, like many other SMCAs, allow certain types of fishing. And as Controller Cohen and Frank mentioned earlier, and others have mentioned earlier in this meeting, this area is also tragically polluted. And so at this time, and including an MPA like this would not meet the biodiversity goals of 30 by 30. And so we ask to please consider the fully and highly protected areas as more effective than these lighter protected areas. I also would like to take the opportunity just to applaud and continue the equity work and asked that the OPC ensures that accessible and inclusive opportunities for a wide variety of outdoor recreation experiences are an outcome of OPC's guidelines, as majority of coastal visitors are non-consumptive activities. And we know that there is much work ahead for equitable access for the coast, and we look forward to seeing this continually improved and look forward to continuing to partner with OPC and greatly appreciative of all of your work. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Josefina Barantes, followed by Richard Sadowski. Josefina, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, and thank you for the time to speak today. My name is Josefina Barantes, and I'm the 30 by 30 coordinator and Del Norte advocate for the environmental protection and services zone, also known as EPIC, on the North Coast. I am speaking today to urge that the Ocean Protection Council includes estuaries in the 30 by 30 decision-making framework for coastal waters. Estuaries and bays need to be included in the coastal waters that OPC seeks to consider with this framework. In Del Norte County, the Smith River estuary has been overlooked and severely damaged by pesticide runoff from lily-bulb farms in the Smith River plain. The damage to wildlife in the estuary certainly impacts wildlife and water quality that connected nearby ocean waters. To learn more about the pesticide contamination of the Smith River estuary, please read the Siskiyou Land Conservancy's 40-year report. We hope that this body considers including bays and estuaries in the decision-making framework. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Richard Sadowski, followed by the final speaker, Samantha Jones. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you. This is Richard Sadowski, Homefront, EJ, Morro Bay. Forgive me if I'm not on point on this one, but one of the things that, we're challenged with here is, with the Morro Bay Wind Farm, and part of that part being of the 30 by 30 program. Recently, it's come to our attention that Equinor is possibly getting reconstructed. That's one of the leases, and leaving that. And we need to maybe emphasize the dire straits that ocean acidification is causing, and how we can, maybe promote, educate the local public a little bit more. We're coming up with a lot of resistance here, and some of that information isn't clear and concise. The other thing is in the 30 by 30 program, we have a small Morro Bay estuary here with a small state marine reserve and a recreational area, and I feel that just because an area is small doesn't mean it can't have attention, and we should be taking a any coastal blue carbon area along the coast, I feel, is worthy of research and put funding into research and education for the public here locally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is Samantha Jones. Samantha, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Samantha Jones, and I am a graduate student studying marine biodiversity and conservation at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. First, I want to thank the Ocean Protection Council for its dedication to California's biodiversity and for its leadership in implementing the 30 by 30 framework.
I'm so sorry. We're going to have to interrupt public comment for a moment. So I noticed that several moments ago, some of us felt an earthquake that we have experienced, and my colleague in the back identifies that it's a magnitude 5.8 in Nevada. I believe our Department of General Services, which manages the building on site, has instructed us to stay put, so to confirm that we haven't left. But given that the audio was a little bit scratchy, I just asked a staff member to actually just travel out to the security kiosk. If somebody can just travel out there just to confirm that we are to stay here. I'm almost positive I heard that.
Do you mind?
Okay, we got Stacy headed out there.
Thank you.
It was interesting. I saw Ann and Pike, and a few of us felt like we felt a little bit of that. I'm not sure if you did. But in any event, the show goes on. So I apologize to the person providing public comment, but please proceed.
No problem. I hope everybody is okay over there. I'm in San Diego. I didn't feel it, but where was I? So California's biodiversity, and I want to thank the OPC for protecting California's biodiversity.
I'm so sorry. We're getting another announcement. Well, let's note that we need to improve the audio in the building announcements here. I sure do hope that was the last announcement, but they just told us to stay in the building, confirmed to stay in the building. So once again, our apologies. Please proceed.
30 by 30 ambition is vital for ensuring the resilience of our ecosystems and the health of our coastal and marine resources. While I fully support the framework, I would like to highlight the critical importance of strengthening enforcement in California's marine protected areas. California has established a world-class MPA network, but the concept of paper parks, protected areas that lack effective enforcement and management often come up in discussions about conservation effectiveness. Without adequate enforcement, these areas risk falling short of their intended ecological and biodiversity goals. I understand and appreciate the significant work the state has already undertaken in this area, but continued investment in enforcement, monitoring, and community engagement is essential to ensuring these protections are meaningful. The 30 by 30 framework has the potential to set a global example for conservation success, and ensuring that our MPAs are fully protected and effectively managed will be key to achieving this vision. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to provide comment and for your commitment to California's biodiversity.
Thank you so much for your input and your patience.
Chair Crowfoot, there is no further public comment.
Okay, thank you. So we have a range of really thoughtful public comment that we may want to discuss, and we also have an action item before us to consider funding that has been enumerated to advance 30 by 30 in coastal waters. So at this point, I would open it up to any council members that would like to share remarks. And maybe I'd proceed. I'll jump in first. First of all, I think you both deserve credit for the outreach and the public process that you've run. And I note that regardless of different perspectives provided here today, everyone was thankful for the transparent and inclusive process. So I think that's a really, that's an important point. I think also the range of input demonstrates the challenge we have in working to achieve 30 by 30. We know that as of now, we identify 16% of coastal waters as conserved or as counting to 30 by 30. And right now, we get to that total by totaling up the acreage of marine protected areas, both fully conserved and highly conserved. I also note that there is another round of proposed marine protected areas being considered by the Fish and Game Commission right now. My understanding is that the total acreage of all of those proposals equals about an additional 3%. So while there are strong opinions on all sides of many of those proposals, I think we recognize that MPAs, regardless of whether they are adopted in full, would not be the pathway to achieving 30 by 30. So I wonder if it's possible if our colleagues in the booth could bring up that slide that identified the 4 pathways. It's the first slide to achieve 30 by 30. And what I want to recognize is the work that we need to do identifying what are these other 3 pathways to achieve 30 by 30 and what are the criteria to achieve them. Again, our Fish and Game Commission is the body that under state law is considering modifications of the MPA network, and that work is underway. But then there are these other 3 pathways, including enhancing conservation in national marine sanctuaries, exploring the role of other spatial management measures, and supporting tribally led conservation, specifically including indigenous marine stewardship areas. So I'm eager for this process to yield potential pathways through these other areas as well. And I'll just note the thoughtfulness of the comments, everything from the importance of building in tools to protect our estuaries, to producing a gap analysis regarding biodiversity, which I think we've discussed. Those that really want to ensure the highest level of protection, as well as those that make their living on the sea, specifically through fishing, that believe there can be both fishing and a high level of protection. So this is obviously a complex discussion and one that encompasses a range of perspectives. I am really eager, though, to ultimately find a path forward to achieve 30 by 30. And I know everyone is. From my perspective, we have a charge from our state legislature, a state law that says we shall achieve 30% conserved areas in coastal waters and lands by 2030, and I think that's a charge we have to take really seriously. So I think this is absolutely the right approach to be as inclusive and thoughtful, and I want to move to a point where we can actually begin to make more progress towards 30 by 30. So I'll leave it there. Are there any other comments? Megan.
Yes, I also appreciate all the public comments and the amount of time and thoughtfulness that people have put into this process so far. And I look forward to seeing how OPC staff updates the draft framework based on that input. I also do, based on Secretary Crowfoot's last comment there, understand that there is an opportunity through the MPA guide to look at fishing and gear types and sort of quantification as what's allowed in highly protected areas. And so I do encourage some work in that space in terms of looking at existing fisheries management approaches and how that, does still reach that highly protected goals and where it may fall short, just so there's sort of an understanding what that landscape looks like currently with the fisheries management approach. So, yeah, thank you guys. I do have some comments on the funding part, but I'll wait if others have comments on the first part. Is that okay? Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I really do appreciate, again, the interest to put funding towards this, and I just had a couple questions about the funding priorities and sort of how the criteria is going to be evaluated. So for funding priority 1, $2 million has been designated, and in the staff report it said related to Appendix E in the Pathways document. That is an extremely extensive list of things. $2 million is not a lot of money. So I'm just wondering specifically sort of how data is going to be prioritized in terms of those data gaps, and what thought's been put into that so far.
Yeah, so we've already started having those conversations. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Yeah, we've already started having those conversations about all of the priorities in Appendix C, but which are applicable now at this stage of 30 by 30 in the evaluation and moving into the implementation phases. And so with the full RFP, we'll very clearly, explicitly show what priorities from Appendix C are going to be looked at for the full RFP release. But as an example, we've thought about the characteristics of climate refugia for important species and species groups, locations, current and predicted, of potential climate refugia, or some of the improved understanding of land-sea connections, because that land-sea interface was brought up numerous times within the policy. So those are just some examples of the priorities in Appendix C that we intend to move forward, and the full RFP will be really clear about that.
Okay, thank you. And have you thought about sort of caps on proposals in terms of what folks can request out of each of the pots?
Yeah, so, restoration and stewardship actually is pretty expensive, right? So that's going to have a much wider range. But for the action-oriented science, there's very likely to be a smaller cap on funding, so we can fund some more projects.
Okay. And then I realize there's sort of the 2 timeline tracks, and I understand the desire is to give tribal applicants a little more time. But you also talked about there would be flexibility between the 3 pots, and so what's that trigger point to know,
Yeah, so we actually are going to have all letters of intent due at the same time, but then expanded timeline for the full proposals. And the letters of intent are just going to be so we know sort of what the projects and the amount that are coming in and when people intend to do. So we can sort of start to have some of that consideration in the review process.
So in those letters of intent, there'll be specific funding amounts requested and all of that as a part of it? So you have a full breadth of that?
I think the letters of intent will just be sort of the funding priorities and the projects that they're intending. The letters of intent is intended to be a lighter lift before the full proposal process.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand sort of the council's role in terms of how much direction and guidance we give staff, because it appears in this particular ask, there's a lot of latitude where staff is sort of given a lot of free will in this space. And so I just want to sort of understand that part.
Yeah, we also actually aren't totally sure all the proposals that will come in, which is why we wanted to be able to shift priorities amongst the 3 funding. And then it is complicated to have that dual timing of, allowing for that extended full proposal period. However, we want to start seeing some things happen now, especially towards that action-oriented science, some of those projects, in order to get them funded sooner rather than having to wait for everything to come to September. So
If I might jump in here. Thank you, Abby. I think that the council should feel empowered to share priorities with us and help us refine if there are strong recommendations on how we do this in the right way.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think just in the future, I might recommend actually those priorities being brought forward a little clearer, and sort of a clear understanding about we're looking for, $1 million projects in this area, or what the sort of range is. Scoring criteria, is there an interest to have it, geographically scoped across the state? Is there particular key areas based on some of the public comments we've heard today, and key habitats, those kinds of things? So I would just ask for a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of what's being brought forward for our consideration, please.
I would also share that because we meet on a quarterly basis, perhaps we ask for updates either through the executive director's report or through staff report on the development of this. On the one hand, I really appreciate the desire to stay somewhat flexible, given this is a new program and we don't anticipate the proposals that will come in. I recognize that the amounts that you've identified roughly correspond to what staff is recommending we would fund at if each funding area, receives adequate proposals. But I also appreciate that you're trying to give yourself some flexibility if there are not enough proposals in one area. I'll agree with Megan that, there's a lot more need, for example, than $2 million for science, action-based science. But this is the next step, and we'll learn from this. I also think this is a great opportunity to partner with Ocean Science Trust, as well as our partners at UC and CSU. I mean, there is tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of ocean-based research that happen. And so I know already that there's a lot of that science that's informing these questions. And I think the more that we can draw direct or make direct research requests or identify the questions we're working to answer, I think we'll have a lot of active partners that want to see their science matter to our management.
Thank you.
Good. Then we have a question before us to approve the staff recommendations, and the motion could be moving to adopt the proposed findings for all projects as recommended by staff.
So moved.
Controller moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Katie Landau, the reliable second this meeting. Let's see you do a roll call.
Chair Crowfoot,
Yes.
Katie Landau,
Yes.
Controller Cohen,
Aye.
Megan Rocha.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
The motion passes.
Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody who came in for public comment. I thought that was really helpful to help understand the contours of this discussion. And I do think, given kind of the criticality of the decisions that we're making at OPC and how they impact 30 by 30, it would be helpful when we reconvene in March, hopefully for an update in terms of how it's going, either again through the director's report or through staff.
It will be so.
Okay, thanks so much. We're going to move on to our final action item of the meeting. Keep in mind that the following item after this is an opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items. But this is an important action item because it addresses the resilience of our kelp forests, which has been a topic of priority over the last several years. And this is an action item to consider and potentially approve disbursement of funding to support adaptive management and resilience of kelp forests. And we're joined by our colleague Pike Spector, who is Biodiversity Program Manager. And I believe we'll also be joined by Tristan Anush McHugh, who's the Kelp Project Director of the Nature Conservancy. So I'll turn it over to you, Pike.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Crowfoot. Again, my name is Pike Spector. I am the Biodiversity Program Manager, and I'm thrilled to be joined virtually by the Nature Conservancy's Kelp Project Director, Tristan Anush McHugh. Tristan has shown incredible leadership on California's North Coast, leading in-water restoration efforts up there, and she's here to present today as the PI on her funded work under the Accelerating Kelp Research Program. So next slide, and it's yours, Tristan.
Welcome, Tristan.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Okay, excellent. Let's do it. Good afternoon, Council. My name is Tristan Anush McHugh. I'm the Kelp Project Director with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm honored to be here today to provide an update to the Council 1 year following approval for the Big River Kelp Recovery Project in coastal Mendocino County. Next. Our project has 3 objectives. 1, in-water kelp recovery by strategically implementing our best techniques. 2, investigate urchin fishery adaptation to effectively direct kelp restoration efforts. And 3, ensure long-term ecosystem stewardship through experience and connection. And today I will share this program's year 1 outcomes, noting that it builds on years of learning, also made possible by previous OPC and match investments. Next. Next. At the core of our work, a refugio location that survived the great losses between 2014 and 2019, part of the surviving 4% has experienced an 84% decrease in kelp canopy in the past 2 years, with 2023 being the most drastic decline. Next. As such, our prescribed treatment for this recently deforested location is twofold: to suppress native purple urchin grazers and catalyze vegetative recovery via kelp enhancement. Next. We began with a targeted urchin harvest along the kelp edges, for example, blocks 1, 2, 3, 12, to facilitate a spillover effect from adjacent forests. Then in areas furthest from kelp, like 9 and 10, we prescribed a treatment of both grazer suppression and kelp enhancement. Next. In 2024, commercial urchin divers harvested 27 tons of purple urchin from restoration sites. And 6 vessels, 12 divers, contributed to over 500 underwater hours and provided a substantial opportunity to the urchin fishery. Next. Amazingly, we did see that natural spillover. Within 2 months of grazer suppression, the forest grew, became reproductive, and expanded. Next. And this is further corroborated in our 2024 kelp canopy maps, where you can see we were able to protect and expand remnant kelp. And there's even more underwater beneath the surface. And now pivoting to our kelp enhancement efforts. Next. Building on years of learning, this year we piloted novel archive modules to accelerate kelp recovery. Next. Next. This is an archive module. Where tree helps with slice at the surface and simply cross off the boat. Next.
Tristan, we couldn't hear you speaking over the video, so you may want to just tell us what we just saw.
Okay, great. That was an archive module at deployment where juvenile kelps were spliced into the line there and simply tossed off a boat. And that is the unit underwater. And next slide, please. Same may happen. Maybe not. This is 1 month later, and these kelps have become new habitat for baby and adult rockfish with over 10 different associated species accounted for, an incredible biodiversity gain. Next. And then lastly, it's with great pleasure to report that by the month 2 of deployment, the owl-planted kelp became reproductive and we're dropping spores all over the restoration site, giving hope for a forest to emerge on the seafloor next spring. Next. Next year, we'll be continuing urchin harvest and scaling up our kelp enhancement activities to put more vegetation in the system, and we will continue monitoring. Next. Next, please. Thank you. In objective 3, this is community enrichment through meaningful hands-on experience. Next. To start, 5 local interns participated in kelp recovery efforts of objective 1, everything I just shared with you. They had hands-on experience to further prepare a climate-ready workforce. Next. In addition to further engage non-diving community members, this year we launched the first ever Kelp Fest to elevate other ways of knowing and stewarding this invaluable ecosystem through art. Next. Science. Next. Food. Next. And film. All events sold out with over 1,500 participants registered for the month-long event. We are now planning for the 2025 Kelp Fest. Next. Lastly, our recovery program aims to build back biodiversity of seaweeds and the hundreds of species that depend on them for food and habitat. As such, we are combining art and science to create a visual record that captures changes in biodiversity over time as a tangible way to communicate our results. Next. Lastly, I would like to thank the Council again for their support as we strive to accelerate the pace and scale of this invaluable coastal habitat. I thank all my collaborators, and I am happy to answer any questions now or in the future. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tristan. I did want to point out that I got to attend Kelp Fest this year. It was amazing to see so much community support and buy-in for the restoration efforts happening on the North Coast, which has been severely impacted by the loss of canopy-forming kelp.
And just so we can build anticipation, when does Kelp Fest occur in the time of year? When will it occur in 2025?
Yes, thanks for asking. October, first week of October 2025 is what we're shooting for. Firming up dates, we'll let you know.
And is it Mendocino? I'm saying this because I want to come. Is it Mendocino or Humboldt?
Yes, this is all in Mendocino. Not a lot of happenings around kelp in our area, and this was like a huge draw. So yes, it'll be in Mendocino County. It'll include Fort Bragg community as well as Mendocino.
Got it. Thank you.
Amazing. All right, great. Thank you so much. Let's get to it. Next slide, please. You already know who I am now. Great. OPC's current strategic plan highlights the need to restore and protect kelp forest ecosystems, which requires funding, supporting, and coordinating cutting-edge research projects that fill knowledge gaps and aid in the adaptive management of these iconic underwater forests. Next slide, please. None of you are strangers to the kelp crisis that has been occurring on our coast. The Ocean Protection Council and the state of California has taken bold action in recent years to address the alarming declines in kelp forest ecosystems, which has led towards the development of the Kelp Restoration and Management Plan. I am here today to recommend 2 projects that will advance the KRMP, specifically by addressing key components of this novel plan, a harvest framework and the restoration toolkit. Next slide, please. This first project, assessing commercial and recreational harvest impact on giant and bull kelp in California, directly informs the development of the harvest framework by creating the first ever quantitative model of the impacts that harvest may have on these canopy-forming kelps. Kelp is harvested as an important source of feed for aquaculture species, and compounds derived from kelps are used in a suite of commercial and pharmaceutical applications. The Department of Fish and Wildlife leases beds along our coast for kelp harvest. Giant kelp can be harvested mechanically by boat from the surface down to about 1 meter. Bull kelp, conversely, can only be harvested by hand, which usually involves the mortality of the individual. So the department can issue closures based on the abundance of canopy kelp. And in 2022, the Department of Fish and Wildlife closed the harvest of bull kelp in Mendocino and Sonoma counties due to that catastrophic kelp loss until at least early 2026. So what impact does harvest have on the recovery and resilience of canopy-forming kelps in California and the ecosystems they support? Next slide, please. To address this vital question, researchers from the Woods Hole Institution of Oceanography will create the first ever assessment of the impacts that commercial and recreational harvest may have on kelp forests. They will use historic and current satellite imagery and remote sensing tools to create this relationship. I'd like to point out that there are differences in anatomy between giant and bull kelp, which makes it really hard to assess their biomass above and below the surface. However, this project will create the first ever mathematical relationship to quickly and easily measure the biomass and the resulting impacts that canopy harvest may have. Results from this project will provide marine managers with the tools necessary to understand harvest impacts on giant and bull kelp and ecosystem resilience and recovery, and integrate directly into the KRMP's restoration toolkit and inform the harvest framework. Next slide, please. As we work towards implementing the KRMP, we have been focusing on the restoration toolkit. Yet, as we work towards restoring kelp forest communities, there are a number of unanswered questions around resilience and recovery. If we are to ensure that the forests that we're restoring are durable and resilient in the face of climate change, we need to understand the role that genomics plays in conferring resilience. And in this case, genomics is simply the complete genetic diversity within an individual. So here it's individual giant or bull kelps. And we suspect that high genomic diversity facilitates greater resilience and recovery from emergent threats, such as marine heat waves, disease, and increased storm intensity. However, these questions haven't been answered in the context of our current restoration efforts. Next slide, please. To understand the role that genomic diversity may play in conferring resilience in giant and bull kelp, researchers from
Okay. I feel safe. Safer.
Yeah. What a relief. What a relief. Now we can get back to addressing the real elephant in the room.
Thank you.
Researchers from the University of California, Santa Cruz will create a novel geospatial database of resilient kelp, giant and bull kelp populations on our coast using historic data and previously funded projects, and will create a novel genomic diversity layer to help us understand which populations have higher and lower genomic diversity. They will then lead field campaigns at priority locations identified by OPC and CDFW staff for tissue sampling to, again, gain a better understanding of what genomic diversity looks like in our resilient kelp populations. Through this iterative process, we will gain a comprehensive understanding of the state of genomic diversity, which will directly inform the development of the Kelp Restoration and Management Plan's restoration toolkit and inform future restoration success. Next slide, please. OPC staff recommend dispersing $775,000 to support adaptive management and resilience in kelp forests. $250,000 will support the first ever assessment of commercial and recreational harvest impact on giant and bull kelp. $525,000 will support strategic mapping of genomic diversity of giant and bull kelp. Both of these projects fill critical knowledge gaps and advance our efforts to protect, restore, understand, and manage these iconic ecosystems in the face of an ever-changing climate. Next slide, please. Thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Many thanks, Pike. I have a question or set of questions, but let's move to public comment now. And for anybody who's joining us in person, please come to the front. Anyone on Zoom, please click the raise your hand, and anyone by phone, #2. Hello.
My name is Keith Rutzer. I'm with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. And kelp first began 32 million years ago, but in the last 2.6 million years, it's evolved into what we recognize today. The entire west coast of North America was dominated by giant kelp forests, with sea otters predating on invertebrates and sea cows predating on kelp. The stellar sea cow evolved to be big and buoyant, and herds of those manatees grazed in the kelp beds. Eating the kelp canopy allows sunlight to penetrate deeper into the water, and giant kelp recruits into the light. When a kelp stipe is trimmed, it sends up another stipe, making it thicker and more resilient. In Monterey, we have lost most of our kelp forests. What kelp remains along Cannery Row is where the Monterey Abalone Company has coincidentally harvested kelp for the last 30 years. Kelp harvesting is essential to that resilience, and acts as a proxy for the now extinct sea cow. In our 2023 MPA petition to the Fish and Game Commission, petition, we are asking to allow the kelp canopy pruning and planting in coordination with kelp restoration efforts. The ocean is getting warmer, and marine heat waves are more often and more intense, and kelp makes tissues from carbon dioxide, which is less soluble in warmer water, and the southern range of kelp is becoming tropical and maybe just too warm for kelp. The southern range of the kelp is just way too warm. I've been down in Baja, California, and it's warm there, right? Over the last 30 years in Monterey, we started seeing fish from Southern California, and we are starting to even see lobsters. Now, genetic diversity evaluation of kelp is a great idea. We should also try to plant kelp from the south, in the north, and see if it survives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move to virtual public comment.
We have Kirsten Ramey. Kirsten, you are unmuted and have the floor. Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
We sure can.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, council members, and OPC staff. My name is Kirsten Ramey. I'm an environmental program manager for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Marine Region. I'll keep my comments short, as we did provide a written comment letter. I just want to reiterate that the department supports the disbursement of funds by the Ocean Protection Council on this action item for the adaptive management and resilience of kelp forests. As Pike mentioned, we are in the process of developing the kelp restoration and management plan in partnership with OPC. It will include both giant and bull kelp. These two projects will directly inform the development of the management plan and will help facilitate a robust, adaptive, climate-ready approach to managing California's kelp forest ecosystems in the face of changing ocean conditions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for the partnership of the Department of Fish and Wildlife with OPC. Are there any other public comments?
There's no further public comment.
Great. So just starting off on a comment and a question, you know, if I'm thinking about the last five years on the Ocean Protection Council, there's probably no greater crisis or challenge that has been sort of a through line of our work than the collapse of the kelp forests. To me, it's the sort of largest environmental crisis very few people know about. And the number I recall is well over 90% of large portions of our kelp forests are gone. And as it's been described or explained to me, or at least as I recall being educated, so much of it has to do with the sea star wasting disease and the loss of the sea star predator on the purple urchin and the creation of these urchin barrens. So I really appreciate the fact that we've got a kelp management plan and an action plan. And it seems like so much of the crux of our funding and focus has been, how do we address this ecosystem imbalance with these urchin barrens? And so the first presentation from the Nature Conservancy seems to get right at that question. So Pike, I'm interested in terms of where is the state of our work, and is the science pointing to broader practices to manage and sort of reduce the urchin barrens? And then I guess the question related to that is, these are two separate research questions that are now being asked. You know, the impact of the harvesting of kelp, which seems important to answer, as well as the genomic diversity. Those seem important, but also not at the crux of this question around the urchin barrens. So I want you to, if you would, make the case for this funding while we continue to address what seems like the core threat to the kelp.
Yeah, thank you for your question and for your comments, Chair Crowfoot. I would like to acknowledge your leadership in helping us advance the development of the kelp restoration and management plan and the kelp action plan, which really paved the way for letting us get this important work done. Sort of traditionally in the Western science approach to understanding the kelp state, we think about the urchin barren as being this alternate stable state, where you're either kelp dominated or you're urchin dominated. And what we want to see in a balanced ecosystem is a prolific, understory of macroalgae with those giant kelp or the bull kelp canopy, and plenty of urchins in cracks and crevices. However, there's actually a lot of places where kelp is totally denuded and urchins aren't to blame. So the issues facing kelp forest decline are multifaceted, and I understand that these two projects don't solve all of our problems, but they help us understand the kelp state a little bit more, and especially how humans interact with that kelp state. So that the harvest impact basically gives us the tools, with the state of California and marine managers, the tools to understand what sustainable harvest of kelp looks like. And it should be noted that that also includes tribal harvest as well. It's just that mechanical harvest of giant kelp in Southern California was really a driving factor in the sort of first part of the 20th century, and bull kelp hand harvest it's just a different approach. So we're trying to get our heads around that. And recreational harvest is important for a suite of home uses, right, like composting and eating and things like that. So that helps us understand what our targets are for restoration and where we're going with a thriving kelp state in California. And the genomic diversity question, again, helps us understand how kelp forests are changing along our coast. And I don't really want to put my foot in my mouth or get ahead of myself, but I think it does directly inform future outplanting and enhancement projects. Tristan's project with the Nature Conservancy up in Mendocino shows us the results from today's presentation are quite compelling, that a multifaceted approach to restoration may be the most effective. This is our learn by doing approach. So I think we're getting there. We still have a lot of lessons to learn, but the development of the restoration toolkit and the harvest framework really do advance our ecosystem-based management approach for the kelp restoration and management plan.
That's helpful. Thank you. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add, thank you so much for that, Pike. That was perfect. I just wanted to put a finer point on your question, Chair, and that is, we are investing in these efforts to remove purple urchin and see the efficacy and the level of effort and the cost effectiveness of doing those projects. So the previous investments that this council has made are really helping us answer those questions. So it's really, how do we balance this portfolio approach to making sure our kelp forests are resilient into the future and using the best and most cost-effective techniques. So we're still trying to answer those questions. And those 27 tons of urchin that were removed, we're now looking to see, okay, well, what is the kelp going to do once we've pulled those out? And does it mean we can use less effort to maintain that? And what's sustainable over time?
And have we still not found a commercial use for the purple urchin? Isn't that sort of the tragedy here, is that we have this?
There are inroads into the potential application. I don't know that it's necessarily our role, the Ocean Protection Council, as staff of the OPC, to drive that, but I am curious about projects to urchin ranch, which is effectively fattening up those starving purple urchins and then market them. I think there's been relative success with other urchin species around the world. California is not the only place facing this problem, so actually, we might see some more interesting narratives come out of next year's Kelp Fest. I poked my head into an urchin dyeing project where they were using the crushed tests of purple urchins to dye scarves and textiles, and it's a novel and innovative approach. It may not solve the crisis, but it is nice to see some application that is tangible and is a good educational tool as well.
Fascinating. Megan.
I just have a question because I do recall we approved a suite of projects, right, that went through a competitive process. So were these just sort of like gaps in sort of that understanding that either OPC or CDFW identified that are now going to be filled with these projects? Is that my understanding?
Yes, that's exactly right. So the development of the harvest assessment came out of other projects that we funded with the PIs and with the tools that they already use. Mm-hmm. And so the questions started coming out of, hey, how do we get our heads around this? And so that was a very iterative conversation as this is a glaring gap that we need to fill. Mm-hmm. And the genomic diversity question has been keeping me up at night, as well as my colleagues at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, as we work towards developing that restoration toolkit. We just kept sort of spinning our wheels, like, where are we going with this? Mm-hmm. what does a durable and resilient restored kelp forest look like in climate change? And that genomic question is just, it's keeping us up at night.
Okay, thank you.
From my view, Megan's asking really good questions about our process and sort of the decisions we make. And so what differentiates a sort of a pot of money that gets, you do an RFP and put out a competitive, solicitation, and then you have other entities competing against each other versus identifying, sole source entity to do certain research?
I'm going to take this one. Thank you. I think in this particular case and in other situations similar to this, this is really a good example of our strong partnership with our sister agencies, right? So we've been working really closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who's the lead in managing kelp ecosystems, and this was identified by them as a critical need to successfully manage this resource, and so in many cases, like the 30 by 30 item you just considered, we can identify a broad range of needs, and then we want to hear the best ideas. This instance was one that was identified as a key and urgent need to fill a gap so that we can move forward with the kelp restoration and management plan.
Thank you for asking my question more directly.
Yeah, no, your question made me curious. But I think that is really helpful because we have so many partners, and so it's good to understand how we make decisions to competitively solicit versus make a strategic recommendation like this.
Yeah, and I'll just say it's really great, the collaboration between CDFW and OPC staff. So it's great to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really, I'm quite passionate about, us continuing to do all that we can on this, so appreciate what you're doing. We have a proposed action in front of us, and that is to move to adopt proposed findings for all projects as recommended by staff and approve those projects. Is there a motion on the floor?
So moved.
Okay, the controller, 4 for 4, 5 for 5. Looks like...
Come on.
I got it. I'll second.
Okay.
Seconded by Megan. Roll call, please.
Chair Crowfoot,
Yes.
Katie Landau,
Yes.
Controller Cohen,
Aye.
Megan Rocha.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Wonderful. Thanks for the great work, and thanks to our partner from TNC for that really encouraging presentation in the beginning of the item. We're now on to item 8, which is public comment on non-agenda items. And this is for anybody who wants to make a public comment on something we haven't been discussing in our agendized items. And would invite our commenter to come up to the podium. And if you're joining by Zoom, please lift your virtual hand. And if you're joining by phone, it's #2.
Hi, I didn't write down these comments. I just want to tell you guys about something. So Rebecca Schwartz-Lessberg, again, Coastal Policy Solutions, with a very different hat than you usually see me wearing. Not talking about 30 by 30 right now, but I work in Richardson Bay and San Francisco Bay to protect eelgrass. And I want you to know that the investment OPC made in funding the eelgrass protection and management plan for the Richardson Bay Regional Agency is the reason, and that was in, I think, 2021. That's the reason that agency was just last month able to celebrate the launch of the eelgrass protection zone in Richardson Bay, where we now have 700 acres of open water habitat protected from anchoring to protect eelgrass underneath. So the planning and feasibility and stakeholder outreach and spatial analysis that we did with OPC funding was what set the agency up to also receive $2.8 million from the US EPA through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. So these investments that you make early on in these projects are the reason that we are able to, years later, celebrate our conservation wins. And that felt really good to stand there and celebrate. And Megan was able to celebrate with us for that launch in October. And so I want you to know that that's the impact that you have with what you do and with what staff is doing. And it is real and is on the ground and is protecting these resources. So that's the eelgrass protection zone in Richardson Bay. We launched it in October, and now we have hundreds of acres of eelgrass that's protected in perpetuity there. So thank you so much for that
That is really,
investment.
really exciting. Feel free to make that type of public comment anytime you like.
Good one. Good afternoon again. My name is Keith Rutzart. I'm with the Giant Kelp Restoration Project. And I have restored kelp in Monterey 4 times with volunteers. First one I did at Lover's Cove, we did it for 2 years, and we had 20 target sites that we went to every few weeks, and we reduced the prescription of urchins on there, and I grew 1 kelp. And that was it. And it was on our lowest density target. And then at Tanker's Reef, we had a big existing kelp forest, and we worked in it. We removed all these urchins, and the kelp forest grew over time. But then we had to go work on the grid, and so we lost that kelp forest. But we grew another one on the grid, the treatment area where everyone's been studying. And so that grew. And then we had to stop that. And now that kelp forest is being eaten again. But we did try to go to the east of that site and try and restore some more urchins. And we just discovered that there's kelp there now. Like where we had culled urchins just a year ago, there's kelp back there. So it really does work. And I've done a lot of research in this. This is my 6th year of doing this kind of activity. And I think a lot of our hopes are on this kelp restoration management plan that is before the Ocean Protection Council now, and love to see that get through. If I could do anything today, put a fire under that committee, because you're not really supposed to have a result until 2027, right? And that's just way too long for what's going out here in Monterey. And we've been out of the water for a year, and we'd like to get back in. And so if I can do anything today, it would be to at least learn by doing. Do something that is not research, that gets work done in the water, because it's going to take a long time of doing things to learn what we will know in the future. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, and I think we share your urgency and appreciate that there been aspects of our agenda that is really getting people in the water to learn by doing. So appreciate all that you do.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Crowfoot, members of the council and staff, Jennifer Fearing. I think I'm speaking on behalf of myself, but I wanted to flag, at the beginning of the meeting, I heard several references to the notion, Prop 4, from Prop 4, a concept of meaningful and direct benefits. Prop 4 requires that 40% of the overall $10 billion go to that, and I believe it gives the secretary a role and some accountability to the legislature on making sure that's done. I just wanted to flag, because we're raising this in various spaces, that term is not defined in Prop 4, and it will be really important in probably different projects and different programs. There would be an appropriate sort of definition. There might not be a one-size-fits-all, but I just wanted to elevate the need, I think, for some discourse and stakeholder work to determine what's the right way to measure that. And as those funds are allocated and then accounted for, what does it mean to a community or to environment to have had meaningful and direct benefits from an investment? So just elevating that as work to do together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for flagging that. And I'm pleased to share that departments that are named as recipients of funding for the climate bond are already working together to unpack questions just like this. And we want to be in a position to move forward with appropriation of the bond next year in a way that's clear and inclusive and really achieves the equity goals, requirements, among other criteria. So look forward to actually being informed by inclusive input in the first part of the coming year. Excellent. Do we have any virtual public comment?
We do. We have first Jamie Blatter, followed by caller ending in 5936. Jamie, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Jamie Blatter, and I am the North Coast and Climate Specialist, as well as the Tribal Liaison for the MPA Collaborative Network. I just wanted to take the time to thank you on behalf of the MPA Collaborative Network and the North Coast Native Protectors for funding the recently released Ancestral Waters Coloring and Activity Book on Indigenous Connections to California's MPAs. This project has been a dream for many years, and we're so grateful it's become a reality. It was funded as part of round 3 of the MPA Education and Outreach Small Grants, administered by Coastal Quest. It began in July of 2022 and lasted for 18 months. And we are pleased to say it exceeded expectations, and it's just gorgeous. It involved collaborations between more than 20 Indigenous artists, storytellers, and culture bearers from throughout the state. It includes 32 pages of beautiful and engaging content, including coloring pages, language activities, stories, a scavenger hunt, crossword puzzle, word search, and full color art pieces. We've distributed over 30,000 copies to over 130 organizations, 65 of which were tribes, tribal organizations, or tribal schools. And we've been receiving incredible feedback, including about the positive impact of Indigenous youth being able to see themselves represented in these materials. So we thank OPC and Coastal Quest for prioritizing funding tribes and tribal nonprofits and tribal programs. It was really inspiring to hear at a recent grantee meeting about the work of so many incredible organizations supported by this funding that were led by and serving underserved communities. So we look forward to continuing to see you uplift this powerful work. And we sent a stack of these booklets to your office so you can all hold it in your hands. So please find Anne if you'd like a copy. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And speaking for myself, Anne already found me in the lunchroom today and gave me a couple copies. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. So I'm hopeful we can bring copies to our next council meeting to share with our council members and anybody else who wants them. Thanks so much.
Next, we have caller 5936, followed by Richard Sadowski. Caller 5936, you have the floor.
Eileen Bogan, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, speaking on my own behalf. Earlier this year, there was a presentation at the Coastal Commission by a working group of the League of California Cities called the Coastal Cities Group. I would strongly urge OPC to schedule their presentation. A recurring theme during their presentation is that one size does not fit all. Point in case is managed retreat. Pacifica has houses falling into the ocean. Managed retreat would cost $1 billion. Santa Cruz has a West Cliff Drive project that will move the road away from the crumbling cliff. San Francisco's originally proposed managed retreat project would have completely closed a section of one of its highest priority emergency routes called the Great Highway between Skyline and Sloat. Even though managed retreat has been changed to a 1 mile long seawall, the roadway will still be completely closed to vehicular traffic. Why? When neighbors object to completely closing a critical roadway to vehicular traffic, they are scolded like children. The fallout was a highly divisive ballot measure, the recall campaign of a district supervisor, and a reputational shift for both local and state agencies, as well as allegations of abuse of discretion. I would strongly urge the Ocean Protection Council to advocate before the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to instruct the state auditor to conduct an audit during the upcoming season as it relates to permits and grants issued by the Coastal Commission and Coastal Conservancy for the City and County of San Francisco and its related agencies and departments. Since the 2025-26 regular session, committee leadership has not been established, I would also urge OPC members who represent the state legislature to become members of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee for the upcoming session. Regarding today's earthquake, a reminder of public safety in the context of 30 by 30. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Richard Sadowski, followed by Alberto Rivera. Richard, you have the floor.
Richard Sadowski, Homefront EJ, Morro Bay. And I first off, thank you so much for all the great work that you guys are doing over there and at the OPC and that theme that I hear is the learn by doing theme. And I like what Pike said as well with regards to the kelp. We have to go out and do it. And one of the things that is really helpful when we look at it from a social standpoint, California College Core program, we are, our group collaborates with our fiscal sponsor, Ecologistics, and we're able to have sponsored three College Core fellows. And one of the beauties of this is just like the OPC is expanded and collaborating with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and all these other state agencies. Even in colleges, you get into silos or cubicles and you don't, collaborate. And yet with the College Core program, we have, for instance, a statistics senior working with a researcher in the carbon lab analyzing data, for instance, that way. And one of the greatest benefits for the kids, for the students and the fellows, is the funding to help pay for the astronomical cost to just live here in this area and be able to work in this area. So, I anything you guys can do to help keep promoting that project and helping the future. They're learning, they're doing the work on the ground to try to figure out this challenge that we have here in California with the climate change that is happening. So once again, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard.
Our final speaker is Alberto Rivera. Alberto, you have the floor.
Hi again. So I'm representing the Aburto Lab with Dr. Octavio Aburto, who is actually at the COP16 in Colombia. So I actually just wanted to thank you, Chair Crowfoot, for your sentiment and spirit in thinking about how institutionalizing equity into research is incredibly important. So I just wanted to follow up with, after witnessing everything in the meeting today, just a quick recommendation for OPC letters of intent to also include diversity statements into those applications and proposals. We have been working with communities along the Gulf of California and Mexico for 25 plus years and have seen the benefits of empowering local communities to become managers of their resources. And as many have said here today, California is amazing at their management of conserved areas. And so we've been pushing in Mexico and have been helping these diving cooperatives form protection of dive sites all across the coasts of the Gulf of California, and believe that could be a pathway that Ocean Protection Council can start to seek out to see if we can increase conservation in California. In Mexico in 2019, the scuba industry contributed $725 million to the Mexican economy. Fishing contributed 700 million. And this is true of probably lots of places in the world as world fisheries are declining. So increasing protection of these dive sites, I think, is really important. Just spreading the idea, and thank you again for the spirit of increasing equity across the institutional level across California. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, huge thanks what you're doing across borders. So I believe that's the end of our public comment, which
Correct.
takes us, great, thank you, Sarah, which takes us to the end of agenda item 8. And our last agenda item is simply to share information on our next meetings. Our next meeting will be held on Monday, March 3rd from 1 to 5 p.m. It's a hybrid meeting. It's taking place here at the Natural Resources Agency headquarters in Sacramento, and also Zoom and phone participation will be available. And then for anybody that's tracking, we have our rest of our dates set for 2025, and that includes June 10th, September 30th, and December 9th. And all of those are posted on the Ocean Protection Council website. Thank you so much, council members, for your time and attention, and for the wonderful OPC staff for doing what you do, and all of our partners who have either tuned in or joined us here today at the headquarters. Thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned.
We're sorry, your conference is ending now. Please hang up.